What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto accidentally got an ANBU operative pregnant? And now the Hokage wants him dead. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. Sarutobi sighed heavily, leaning back in his worn padded chair. He loved the old thing. He'd chosen it especially when he'd first made Hokage as a teenager, back when he was too short for his feet to touch the floor if he sat back in the cushy, fluffy thing. In this chair, he'd faced many troublemakers and passed many laws. Here he'd cuddled his 3 children and 1 grandson, and played both aggravator and peacekeeper. From here, he'd ruled a kingdom. Today, his faithful chair was the place he had chosen to sit as he rocked the plaintively crying infant in his arms gently, trying to soothe it. The boy was barely 3 months old, but he already had vivid blonde hair and a wide smile. Of course, he wasn't smiling now. No, he was screaming, sobbing, his blue eyes clenched tightly closed against the world. Shush, it's okay, little one, Sarutobi said calmly, unruffled by the loud noises. You're safe now. Hush. Eventually, the baby's wailing ebbed, until he was snuffling slightly against Sarutobi's chest, face buried in the old man's neck, breath catching in a sob occasionally. Sarutobi waited patiently, rocking the infant to sleep, some distant part of him amused to see the ANBU who had brought him here still standing stiff and unmoving at attention in the middle of his office, and wondered vaguely how long he could keep it up. Dog, the Sandaime said eventually, shifting the now sleeping baby to lie in his arms the conventional way instead of propped up against his chest in a hug. Tell me what happened. The ANBU bowed his head and began to speak in a brisk, clipped tone. A group of intoxicated civilians broke into the house the boy has been inhabiting, and proceeded to attack as he lay on a rug on the living room floor, he said formally. I intercepted and apprehended them, and with the help of my partner, Owl, subdued and arrested them. The infant was highly distressed but appeared unhurt. Sarutobi nodded, tracing the little boy's soft cheek. And what of Aya-san? He asked. Was she injured? Dog hesitated a beat before saying tonelessly, the child's guardian was not present. She had left the house several hours before the attack. The old man's hand clenched, gripping the soft blanket Dog had thought to wrap the child in before he'd brought him here. Aya, the woman he had charged with caring for the baby, had abandoned him, and then a group of drunken villagers attacked him. How much longer can hatred for this innocent child fester in my village? He said sadly, almost to himself. The ANBU shifted slightly. Permission to speak freely, sir? He asked. Sarutobi nodded once and waved his hand, gesturing Dog to continue. This is getting ridiculous, he burst forth. Every other day, someone attacks him. The village wants him dead, Hokage-sama. He needs to be protected better than this, the masked man finished lamely. The Hokage shook his head. I understand you, Dog, I really do, he said to the rather short ANBU standing before him. But the problem is, what do we do with him? I can find no better way to deal with this situation than to leave things as is and hope and pray the villagers will grow to accept him. Dog snorted derisively. That's never going to happen, he said flatly. People are far too good at holding grudges. Do you have a solution to offer? Sarutobi questioned, sincerely curious and with a sneaking suspicion that the entire purpose of Dog's visit was to tell him one such solution. As expected, Dog nodded. I do, sir, he said. I propose the child is taken into ANBU custody. There are sects that specialize in the raising and training of children. He could disappear into ANBU, at least until he is strong enough to defend himself from angry drunks. Sarutobi frowned, unconsciously tightening his grip on the baby. I had hoped to give him a childhood as close to normal as possible, he reminded the ANBU. He needs to be among people, needs a chance to get to know children his own age and participate in a community. Sir, if things keep on the way they are, he won't get that, Dog replied. People hate him. There's no way they're ever going to let their children play with him. It's not going to happen. And frankly, better isolated in ANBU than dead before his first birthday. However, if he disappears in a few years' time, you can reintroduce him into the village under a different name, and he is sure to be better received. Sarutobi considered, rearranging the blanket around the sleeping bundle in his arms. Finally, he sighed and nodded. Very well, Dog, I will accept your solution. Take the boy. Give him to ANBU Agent Mouse. She can be charged with his care for the first few months. Dog nodded. Mouse had been pulled off active duty due to a severe leg injury, and had been cooped up in ANBU HQ since then. It was a good choice. Yes, sir. The boy is to be addressed as Pup, I think, in any and all reports, requests, memos and notes sent from ANBU regarding him, Sarutobi continued. If he is to disappear, he will disappear completely. His given name, however, should be used to his face. I will not take the name his father gave him away. He has no surname while in ANBU. Yes, sir. Dog bowed before carefully taking the baby in his arms. He held the infant gingerly, as if frightened the kid would break. A moment later, he was gone in a twist of smoke. Sarutobi dug in his pocket for his pipe and leaned back in his well-loved chair. Lemur, he called, and another ANBU, one of his guards, flickered into the visible spectrum. Sir, go into the village, Sarutobi ordered, tapping his pipe to clear it before stuffing fresh tobacco into it. Spread the news. Uzumaki Naruto was killed this morning. ANBU codenamed Owl stood on one side of a two-way mirror, watching as the four men on the other side slowly sobered up. These people were little better than dirt in Owl's mind, having spent a month and a half guarding the brat they'd tried to kill and finding him to be nothing more than a baby. What kind of monster kills a baby? Well, without an order from the Hokage to do so, the elite assassin had to add. These bloody civilians. So here they were in an ANBU interrogation cell. Owl was desperately hoping for the chance to misinterpret an order and give them a few marks to remember him by before he was forced to, once again, let them go. The door opened behind him and Dog entered, holding that telltale blue bundle to his chest awkwardly. Owl grinned behind his porcelain mask. Poor Dog, he had no clue when it came to babies. He was probably scared to put the kid down. Hey, Dog, he said casually to his teammate, turning back to the prisoners. What did the Hokage say? The child will be raised in ANBU until he can be safely integrated back into the village. He's been officially declared dead. Owl blinked. So what'll that mean for them? He asked, pointing at the four men, two of which were vomiting as their bodies rejected the alcohol they'd consumed. Owl fought a snigger. Civvies couldn't hold their liquor. Dog shrugged. They attacked and killed a civilian child. That's premeditated murder of an infant. They'll be tried for treason and, if found guilty, should be executed. Somehow, though, I think they'll get off with a prison sentence. Owl nodded. If not a severe warning, he said bitterly. The public will cry out for their release. But execution would be daft. Why make them into martyrs? Dog considered the men with distinct distaste for a moment before turning away. I have to take the kid to Mouse. Do you know where she is this time of day? Mouse? Good choice. She's usually over at East Wing, training, trying to force her leg to heal quicker and inevitably slowing the process, Owl said casually, leaning back against the mirror and looking down at the shorter by a head ANBU. Say, if they killed the brat and all, do you think Head would mind if I roughed him up a bit? Dog rolled his eyes. If you must, he sighed, turning away. Just don't kill them, or make it too obvious, no blood. Don't make them into martyrs. Owl's hidden grin was feral. Gotcha, he said, turning back to peer predatorily at his four new victims. Then he thought of something and glanced back at Dog, who was making to leave. Hey, Dog, what's the kid's name gonna be? Dog was halfway out the door, and paused half a beat before saying simply, Pup, and sweeping away, arms awkwardly clamped around the infant. Owl raised a brown eyebrow behind his mask. Pup, he repeated, shaking his head. A code name already. That kid is destined for high places. Focusing once again on the four prisoners, Owl cracked his knuckles and cackled. Oh, this was going to be fun. That night, there was a celebration in the village hidden in the leaves. Sarutobi watched the milling crowds below from the window of his tower, shaking his head regretfully as their shouts and laughter reached him. The 4th of January would likely become something of an unofficial festival in the years to come, the day the Kyuubi brat was finally disposed of. Someone pounded on his door, but he totally ignored it. People had been streaming into his office all day, each demanding the release of the 4 men who had done the deed. His council members wanted to gather and gloat at him, but he hadn't attended the meeting. Instead, he was enjoying the joys of a newly installed lock on the door. Said door rattled for a moment as whoever it was tried to force his or her way in, and then fell silent as he or she gave up. You can't ignore us forever, Hokage-sama. A voice reached through to him, but he totally ignored it. So, he mused to himself, what are you going to do with your murderers? He hadn't been able to place them with the Uchiha in the public jail, despite the numerous claims that, as they were civilians, they shouldn't be held by ANBU, simply because at the time they'd been getting false memories implanted in their minds so that their story would stand up under questioning. But that was done now, and half an hour ago he'd given the order to have the men moved to maximum security in jail. He couldn't execute them, that was for certain, nor, judging from the crowd's dancing and feasting below, could he imprison them for anything near as long as he wanted to. He could give them a choice, Sarutobi thought. After their trial, once they were found guilty, and by hellfire, they would be, he could give them a choice. Say, 30 years in jail, the maximum sentence for premeditated murder, or a public lashing. Knowing the men, they'd all choose the quick, painful route, and Sarutobi could feel slightly vindicated as he watched them beaten until they bled. Ah, corporal punishment. How he loved it. Mouse hummed to herself as she limped through her new, and larger, quarters. Agreeing to take in a child that had been officially declared dead had its perks. Reaching into the crib that had been set up for her, she lifted the fussing baby, cooing to him absently. There, now. Hush, hush. You're probably hungry, right? Well, we'll deal with that right now. Propping the baby up against her shoulder with one arm, she walked to the kitchen section of her quarters. She had a sink, a fridge, and a dishwasher. How cool was that? In digging around for some baby formula and a bottle. She made it up quickly, double-checking the temperature was right and wouldn't burn the baby's mouth before she offered it to him. Naruto latched onto the rubber teat instantly, blue eyes staring up at her in amazement before flicking around the room, taking in everything. Mouse smiled. She loved this age. They were just so interested in everything, wiring up their eyes before they learned how to move anything else. Is that better, little pup? She asked, sitting down on her bed to feed the blonde infant. Naruto's response was to shift his gaze back to her masked face for a moment, before he went back to looking around. Mouse chuckled a little, running a hand over his little stomach and soft legs. She was going to enjoy this assignment. With her free hand, she reached up and pulled off her mask, allowing the boy to see her features and grinning as his eyes widened in surprise. He didn't stop drinking for a moment. A soft knock on the door caught her attention and she quickly replaced the porcelain before calling, "Enter." The door opened slowly and Dog came in, carrying a manila folder. "I brought you the boy's file," he said without so much as a hello. "It contains birthday, blood type, allergies and so on. That should be all you need to look after him. The Hokage wants you to contact him directly if there is a problem." The short masked figure placed the folder on the table in the center of the room. She got a table. Squee nodded and turned to leave, but Mouse called after him. "Dog, wait a moment. Do you want to, if you want to visit the baby, you're welcome to?" "I have no interest in the child," Dog cut in acidly. "I am merely following orders, and now my obligations have been fulfilled." "Good day." Mouse frowned at his back. "Kakashi," she snapped, "you know you're being unfair. His father is dead," Dog interrupted again without turning. "Let him rest. Either way, I want nothing more to do with his son." Mouse winced as he left, closing the door with a little more force than necessary. "Don't worry," she said to the baby in her arms. "He'll come around. He's just hurting, grieving, and he really does care what happens to you. He saved you from those nasty men, didn't he? And he brought you here. Just give him time. I mean, he's really just a kid as well, isn't he? He's only 14. Shaking her head, the injured ANBU woman lifted the baby higher and continued to feed him, firmly pushing her dog-masked comrade out of her mind. 18 months old. Now 18 months old, Naruto didn't need to be watched every second. He was sitting on a rug in the center of a locked, child-safe room, surrounded by a great many educational toys. Currently, he was sucking his left thumb, his favorite stuffed toy animal tucked into his left elbow, while his right hand worked to fit a square block through a triangular hole in the side of a box. After a few moments, he stopped and examined the block, then very carefully moved it to the square hole a few inches away from the triangular one. It fit in with minimal effort, and Naruto grinned widely. Now that all the blocks were safe in the box, Naruto moved onto a weird device that frequently made noises and sounds when he pushed random buttons on it. Tentatively, he pressed down on the red button. A siren sounded, and he grinned, happily banging the button again. Next, he pushed against the blue one. and a weird little chamber of the plastic device began to spin, showing him several pictures in quick succession. A set of blue eyes lit up as the child spied the ultimate temptation, an orange button. Instantly, he hit it as hard as he could, and the device promptly seemed to explode, several noises going off at once as other buttons were bumped and a small compartment bursting open. Out popped a small, soft plastic toy, a pig with a huge grin, and a recorded voice said, "Oink, oink." Before the pig was retracted and the hinged door snapped shut. "Oink, oink," Naruto repeated happily, banging the button again. He loved this toy. The door opened with a pressurized whoosh, and Naruto turned his stout upper body in time to see a small, brown animal trot into the room, pause, and sniff him. "Well, you don't need to be changed," he said in a low, gravely voice. "Kakashi, it's safe." Naruto frowned and cocked his head. He vaguely recognized this creature. "Doggy?" he questioned slowly, and the brown creature glanced at him. Naruto was sure now. This furry animal was a doggy, which meant that. "Doggy!" he shouted as a grown-up entered the room, holding a brown paper bag. The man stopped and winced, but Naruto didn't notice as he climbed to his feet and made his wobbly way over to the silver-haired man. "Hello, pup," the man began, but yelped and snapped out his hands to catch the child as he stumbled and fell. "Doggy," Naruto repeated seriously, looking up at the white and red patterned face. "Ook, doggy." He held out his favorite plush toy. Kakashi stared at it for a second, then sighed. "Damn it, Mouse has a sick sense of humor." "Yes, pup, it's a dog." "Well done." Naruto was frowning in confusion at this speech, his head cocked as he tried to follow. "Doggy," he said eventually. Kakashi stared at him for a long second. Growing up in ANBU, where the adults rarely spoke, meant that Naruto had a very limited vocabulary. The sum of all the words he could speak only amounted to 7 words, 3 of which he couldn't say properly. He also had various baby words and half-sounds, but in the end, all he said was ook, meaning look, oink, brrring, hungry, instead of hungry, that, and, of course, doggy. "Why am I here?" Kakashi asked himself. He looked down at his hands, still holding the toddler up, and remembered the paper bag. "Oh yeah, Mouse is on a mission. Someone had to feed him. Hummingbird asked me to pass it along, damn females." "Doggy?" Naruto pressed, big, wide, familiar eyes looking hurt and confused. Kakashi sighed heavily. "That's a nice toy," he said grudgingly. "What's its name?" "Oink," Naruto said brightly. Kakashi rolled his eyes. "Figures. I need to go now," he said in a monotone. "Here is lunch. Are you hungry?" "Hungry?" Naruto repeated the word he recognized. Kakashi offered him the paper bag, and his eyes lit up. Letting both the child and the bag go, Kakashi retreated quickly, pausing outside the door to take a shaky breath. He hated seeing the kid. It reminded him too much of Sensei. It was easier for the 15-year-old to stay away. 28 months old, the old Hokage was sitting on the floor of the playroom, looking singularly undignified, smiling at the 2-foot-high blonde bundle of energy that had recently turned 2 and 4 months old. The child was sitting opposite him, and between them was a child's puzzle with only 8 pieces. Naruto was just fitting the last piece in and he smiled widely. "Doggy," he announced. Sarutobi sighed and shook his head. "No, Naruto, this is a frog," he said gently, pointing to the picture. "Froggy." Naruto frowned. "Froggy?" he repeated cautiously. Sarutobi nodded, and his grin came back. "Doggy froggy," he chanted, and giggled happily. The Sandaime shook his head, smiling as he laughed. "Good enough," he said. Naruto didn't reply, instead hoisting himself onto his chubby legs and toddling away. He had mastered the art of walking with scarcely a wobble, and Sarutobi knew that Ox and B had taken to taking him to the underground training area ANBU had and beginning basic exercises with him. Incidentally going directly against orders but getting away with it by arguing that they'd been playing, not training. Either way, Naruto seemed to enjoy it, so Sarutobi saw no need to interfere. And he was learning to talk better, too, which was a relief. The child was unnaturally small for his age, so much so that Sarutobi would be concerned that he was being neglected and thus his growth being stunted if he didn't have it on good authority that dog had terrified his various carers into feeding him at least 4 times a day. The Hokage cracked a smile again at the thought. Despite the fact that Kakashi couldn't stand to be around the child, he still cared greatly for what happened to Minato's son. It was this distant protectiveness that let Sarutobi feel at ease with the child's current situation. No harm would ever befall Naruto on Kakashi's watch. Unfortunately, Mouse had been killed on a mission 8 months ago, so Naruto had no specific carer, but he seemed to be coping well when he was left generally to his own devices, not minding if different people came to change, feed and occasionally play with him. Something that fascinated Sarutobi was the way Naruto seemed able to distinguish between the masks of the ANBU, even those he had never seen before, with the ease that many could distinguish between people's real faces. After speaking to a psychologist, he had learnt that a child's facial recognition system was wired up at a very young age and based on the people around him, so Naruto would always be able to distinguish different ANBU masks, but would have a hard time, at least at first, until his facial recognition system rewired, telling apart real human faces. "What are you looking for, Naruto?" Sarutobi asked when Naruto began rooting through the drawers lining the side of the playroom. "Oink," the boy said firmly. Sarutobi smiled and pulled himself to his feet, wincing as he felt his old bones creaking. "Oink," he repeated, amusement tinging his voice. "Okay, let's find him." It took approximately 8 minutes to find Oink stashed firmly behind the chest of drawers, and Naruto instantly latched onto the fuzzy canine, his legs giving out to land him with a plop on his sound behind on the floor. Sarutobi joined the child a moment later, and soon he had Naruto and Oink curled up in his lap while he read the child a story. As he read, Sarutobi mentally mused that it was probably getting near the time when Naruto would have to be reintegrated with society as a whole. He needed to be young enough not to tell anyone what had happened in his life, which meant under 4, or else the Hokage would have to wait until he was old enough not to say anything, which would mean 15 or 16. Waiting that long was unfair and unhealthy to the child, so Sarutobi made a mental note to begin arranging for the child to leave the protection of the ANBU. 2 years, 10 months old. Sarutobi smiled just a little and stretched, working the kinks out of his aching back. It had taken him 6 hours of mind-numbing paperwork, but it was finally all arranged. Everything was in place, ready for Naruto to reappear in his village. Just one thing left to do. The Hokage hummed a little as he carefully emptied the third drawer in his desk and placed a stack of folders, files and papers half a foot high into it, locking it securely. They would be safe there until he was ready to begin Naruto's reintegration. Hopefully, things would go better this time. With this pressing matter out of the way, he reached for a red scroll about the size of a cigar, quickly unsealing it and unrolling it across his desk, reading it swiftly. It was an update from Kakashi, who had been on a long-term mission for the last 6 months, and was getting bored with stakeout duty, apparently. Sarutobi chuckled as he read the report, which was laced with a jaded undertone and contained many pleas for mercy. The Hokage shook his head. Kakashi would be done soon, anyway. He just had to survive another 2 months. Dipping his brush into his inkwell, he quickly signed the scroll to say he had read it and placed it in his out tray, ready to be logged and stored by his Hokage slaves. Chunin. No, wait, Hokage slaves. With a triumphant grin, the Sandaime realized he had finished his paperwork. Maybe now he could go home and actually eat dinner with his family for once, catch up with his youngest son, who was just touching 18 now and was the only one still living at home. Hokage-sama? The door had been opened about 3 inches, and the brown eyes of one of the very Hokage slaves he'd been musing over just a second ago appeared in the crack. Hiroko-san, come in, Sarutobi invited. The Chunin nodded and pushed the door open, revealing herself to be holding a stack of papers. These came from Suna just now, she said, placing them on his desk and retreating quickly. Sarutobi saw the red band over them, marking them urgent, and sighed heavily. So much for dinner, he mused aloud, reaching for the top paper. 3 years old, exactly. Kakashi hesitated a brief moment before opening the door leading to the small room Naruto slept in, not to be confused with his playroom. It was 8 o'clock. More than 2 hours past the kid's bedtime, and accordingly Naruto was curled in bed, fast asleep and sucking his thumb. Today was his birthday. Today, 3 years ago, Sensei had given his life and condemned his son to save a village which, to date, had proved highly ungrateful. 3 years is a long time, Kashi, swirled the voice of his teacher in his mind. Kakashi shook his head, banishing it. He knew his teacher would be horrified at how his son was being forced to live. He knew his teacher would want him to let him go enough to hold on to the boy who was still here, alive. But it was hard. Very carefully, unwilling to wake the toddler, Kakashi took a few steps forward and looked at him, tilting his head just a little. He looks fine, the ANBU thought to himself, before turning and leaving silently, closing the door securely behind him. In an instant, the boy was forced from his mind as he met up with the rest of his squad. He was a captain now, and he along with every ANBU not on a mission was slated to spend tonight policing the festival that was thrown in honor of the Yondaime's defeat of the dreaded Kyuubi. Joy. Leading his subordinates to the festival grounds, Kakashi couldn't hold back a sigh, feeling particularly world-weary. He hated this festival. 3 years, 2 months old. Somebody's in trouble, sang Rabbit, the female member of Kakashi's team, the moment the silver-haired man walked into the room that morning. He paused and looked at her, confused even though his mask. "What are you talking about?" he asked. She was grinning, he just knew it. "Hokage wants you," she said airily. "Better hurry. Don't want to be late. You have nearly," she checked the clock hanging on the wall, 7 whole minutes to get there. For a moment, Kakashi stared at her. Then, he deflated and shrugged. I'll be late, then." He laughed as Rabbit's jaw dropped until her chin peeked out below her mask. After dallying a few minutes with his team, checking in with each of them, Kakashi headed off to the Hokage tower. Once he arrived, he was waved in to see the Hokage without having to wait at all, so it was with a slight, hidden, smirk that he knocked on the Hokage's office door. Maybe there was method in Obito's madness, after all. It was murder standing at attention for the typical 40 minutes it took the Hokage to get around to seeing you. "Ah, dog," Sarutobi said as the Hitaki entered the office when prompted. A slight flicker of confusion passed over the old face. "You're late?" "Only just," Kakashi said mildly. "I hear you wanted to see me, Hokage-sama?" Sarutobi hesitated. He wasn't looking forward to this conversation. "Not at all." "Close the door, Kakashi," he said seriously. Kakashi paused when his name was spoken, and very slowly pushed the door until it clicked shut behind him. Then he reached up and removed his porcelain mask, coming further into the room. "Sit down," the Hokage said, gesturing the chair across the desk from Sarutobi. Warily, Kakashi sat down, frowning at the old man. This couldn't be good. After an awkward pause, Sarutobi leant forwards, steepled his fingers, and began to speak. "Kakashi, I wonder if you are aware of the average life expectancy of an ANBU agent?" The Hitaki frowned at the odd way of beginning, but replied anyway, 6 months, sir." "And you have been in the force how long now?" Sarutobi asked. 3 years, sir. Give or take a few weeks," Kakashi answered in turn. The Hokage nodded at him. "Why did you join, Kakashi?" he asked suddenly. Kakashi stiffened. "My reasons are my own," he snapped, then winced. "Sir," he added, trying to make it sound more polite. The Sandame just surveyed him seriously, unmoving. Kakashi felt himself grow hot and uncomfortable under the intensity of the look, and eventually shifted and said, "Is there a problem, sir? Has something happened? Did my last psych evaluation come back below par, or have my superiors reported any problems with my conduct?" After a moment, Sarutobi shook his head. "No, Kakashi. You are, as always, in top form. All I have heard about you are praises, in various states of crudeness, by the way." Kakashi winced, but the old man didn't call him on it. "Kakashi, you have now been in ANBU 6 times the expected length of active duty," he began uncomfortably. "As such, I believe the time has come for you to explore other opportunities." Kakashi froze. He knew what this was. This was the dreaded moment when he would be forcibly discharged from ANBU. It was inevitable. Hang around too long and refuse to either voluntarily retire or die, and the Hokage would pull you from the force. Something about protecting mentality, or similar. Either way, Kakashi was stunned, unsettled and frightened. He wasn't ready to face the world again. He hadn't seen any non-ANBU comrades since he joined ANBU 3 years ago. Well, not out of uniform. Not when they recognized him, too. "You're discharging me?" he blurted, interrupting the Hokage mid-sentence. Sarutobi stopped and considered him. "Yes," he said simply. "I think it is time for you to take a break from ANBU, Kakashi." "But I can't leave," Kakashi insisted. I can't. I don't think I can go back to being a Junin, sir. You would be given special Junin rank, Sarutobi commented. Specializing in assassination. But what would I do? Kakashi demanded. Teach? He barked out a laugh. No, I don't teach. Nah, I destroy the brats, first training session. I will find something to keep you busy, Sarutobi said. Kakashi raked his hand through his hair, the look on his mostly hidden face almost desperate. Please, he said, don't cut me from the force. I need it. I need to be busy. Pressured. Otherwise, I get nightmares, the memories. I need it, he said lamely. Sarutobi watched him with concern. This very dependence is what makes me think you need a break, he said. And I insist. This is not negotiable. Just a break, he added, holding up a hand to stem the protests that had begun to burst forth. In a few years' time, you may resubmit your application to rejoin ANBU. Agreed? Kakashi considered. Honestly, it seemed fair, logical, even. A good way to keep ANBU agents sane would be to rotate them, 3 years in ANBU, 3 years out, giving their minds time to recover. Very well, he said eventually. But the question still remains. What am I to do? Don't say teaching. The Hokage took a deep breath. Now the real fight began. Not teaching, yet, he agreed. I already have a mission I wish to assign you. Unranked. Kakashi stared. Unranked usually meant it was too dangerous and unpredictable to be ranked and frequently ended up being more deadly than S ranks. One could begin pulling weeds and end assassinating small children on an unranked mission. That was fine. Kakashi was good. He wasn't worried, but he was confused. Why would the Hokage forcibly drag him, kicking and screaming, out of ANBU, only to give him an ANBU-esque mission? This mission extends indefinitely, Sarutobi continued. Kakashi felt his gut clench. He'd just gotten back from an 8-month long-term mission. Being back for 2 months had only begun to take the edge off the relief he had felt to being back in Konoha, and he wasn't sure he was ready to leave again, this time indefinitely. This mission will take place in Konoha, Sarutobi continued, almost missing the way Kakashi's shoulders slumped slightly in relief, and then twitched in annoyance at the thought of being stuck in the village indefinitely. It is not a mission you may refuse. Kakashi sighed and placed the porcelain mask he still held in his hand gently down on the desk with a soft chink. What does this mission entail? He asked in a low voice. Sarutobi hesitated. I suppose you could say it is, on the surface, a bodyguard detail, he said eventually. Kakashi's eye narrowed. If your next sentence contains the daimyo's wife, with or without that damnable kitten Tora, I will leave. Better a missing nin than that hell. Sarutobi chuckled. No, he said, waving a hand to calm the, much, younger man. Kakashi's relief was obvious. Hesitating again, Sarutobi decided to just brace and say it, and do his best to railroad Kakashi into doing his bidding. Kakashi, the child we will refer to as Pup, is 3 years old now. It has been a little less than 3 full years since he was first taken into the custody of ANBU. I think the time has come to reintroduce him to Konoha. Kakashi had gone stiff. Sir, I think that is a very bad idea, he stressed. Oh, Kami, you want me to guard him? Sir, if it comes out that Uzumaki Naruto wasn't in fact killed 3 years ago, and was in fact living in the very nerve center of our defenses, the villagers will riot. I'm skilled, yes, but I'm not that skilled. Nobody's that skilled. The kid'll be slaughtered. Sarutobi surveyed him with some amusement. Kakashi, when you first came to me with the idea of hiding him 3 years ago, you said that he should be placed back in the general community after an appropriate amount of time. I meant after 10 or 15 years. Kakashi exclaimed. You can't honestly think that people won't start to connect the dots if a boy exactly Naruto's age looking exactly like Naruto turns up in the orphanage and inevitably begins to show signs of being rather abnormal? That won't be an issue. He will be hidden in plain sight. No one will suspect anything, Sarutobi said confidently. Kakashi stared at him. Have you been drinking? He asked frankly. Sarutobi shot him an annoyed look. You, Kakashi, haven't been seen by any non-ANBU person since you joined Black Ops. I have, as you know, answered every question pertaining to your whereabouts by saying that you are on a long-term mission and vaguely alluding to the fact that you won't be back for some time. Now, I have arranged for your honorable discharge from ANBU, and you are free to return to the village. No doubt your homecoming from that long mission away will be a cause for celebration among your peers. Made a guy especially seems eager for your return. Kakashi winced. Sarutobi pressed on. Also, it provides a unique opportunity to exploit. After all, who would question it if you were to come home with a child after a 3-year absence? The so-dubbed mission babies are very common among ninja in this situation. The Hitaki froze up. He was smart enough to put the pieces together. No, he exploded instantly. I won't do that. No. He banged his fist down on the desk and Sarutobi quickly lifted his teacup out of harm's way. Kakashi, he began, but the newly reinstated Junin was talking over him. Even ignoring how utterly insane this idea is, he looks nothing like me. How are you going to explain that? He takes after his mother, Sarutobi said dignifiedly. Bending down, he tugged open the third drawer and lifted out one of the files, the green one, offering it to Kakashi. The team didn't take it, so he opened it for him and placed it in front of him. Unwillingly, the man skimmed the paper before him, eye resting on the photograph of a beautiful, smiling woman who very clearly resembled Naruto, right down to the whisker marks. Below was a profile. Fun Kita, he read out. Unlucky North. How appropriate. Deceased. 17. Died in childbirth. Ouch, Hokage-sama. That counts as my fault, you know. Whisker marks tattoos, a symbol of her clan, similar to the Inuzuka triangles. This is patently ridiculous. This whole monologue was said in the same unimpressed monotone. Sarutobi met his single gray eye seriously. Why is it ridiculous? He asked. This will never work. Kakashi exclaimed. Never. I'm not the daddy type. Okay. Kakashi, if you had caused a child to be conceived while on a long mission, what would you do? The Sandame questioned pointedly. Kakashi didn't answer. He couldn't. He knew that if he really had through some horrifying mistake created a child, he would bring it home to Konoha and be the best father he could to it. But that didn't mean he could swear someone was laughing at him. It sounded eerily like Obito. No, he protested weakly. I can't do it. I'm not ready to be a father. Do you really hate the kid that much? Surely there are better candidates than me? He tried to pretend he wasn't pleading. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow. Kakashi, you are the best candidate. You know everything about the child, where he comes from and who and what he is, and yet you do not hate him. And, like it or not, you're the closest thing to family the boy has. If you want, think of it as paying off a debt. Kakashi bit back a groan. Of course, the Hokage had to bring that up. It was true that when his father had died, Minato had taken the newly orphaned Kakashi in and all but adopted him. Would have adopted him if not for Kakashi's childish pride. If Minato had survived, he and Naruto would have been raised as brothers. The silver-haired man buried his face in his hands, guilt curling in his stomach. Hell, he mumbled into his hands. Hokage-sama, please. There has to be another option. Kakashi, Sarutobi's voice was firm. This is non-negotiable. This is a direct order from your Hokage. You will take this mission. But his age. Kakashi burst forth. He's too old. It won't work, sir. People will know. Uzumaki Naruto was born 3 years, 2 months ago, Sarutobi said seriously. He died 2 years, 11 months ago. Hitaki Naruto was born 18 months ago. Kakashi stared at the old man, mentally calculating. That would mean he'd been conceived when Kakashi was about half a month into his 16th year. It'll never work, he protested. You can't pass Pup off as half his age. It's impossible. Sarutobi shook his head. Tell me, what is the difference, proportion-wise, between an 18-month-old and a 3-year-old child? Kakashi mumbled, but Sarutobi caught it. That's right, not much. And Naruto is very small for his age. He could easily pass as a big almost 2-year-old. It will work, Kakashi. I have already arranged for it. It's also backstopped. There are people in Lighting Country, which is where you were, by the way, who will swear to knowing Fun Kita their whole lives, and will mutter darkly about the bastard undercover ninja. Who she ended up falling for. Thanks, Kakashi said, highly sarcastic. He seemed to be wilting, his resolve crumbling when faced with Sarutobi's onslaught. Come on, Kakashi, Sarutobi said coaxingly. Do it for Minato, if nothing else. Ensure that his son has a home and someone who cares about him. There was a long, tense pause, before the last of Kakashi's resolve evaporated and he slumped forwards, resting his head on the desk. Fine, he groaned. Sarutobi's face lit up. "Excellent," he said, forcing Kakashi to lift his head by shoving the rest of the folders ferreted away in the third desk drawer at him. "In here, you will find everything you need to know about the last 3 years of your life, the girl you were involved with and the child you created together." "There is something fundamentally wrong with this," Kakashi remarked. His composure recovered, now reading with morbid fascination a series of extensive facts about a woman he had apparently been involved with for more than a year until she tragically died. They'd been the same age. She'd been the daughter of the local innkeeper, a good person to befriend if he wanted the local news and gossip, not to mention a reliable source on who was entering and leaving the town. Her father had threatened to kill him when he'd found out his daughter was pregnant. Kakashi had to feel impressed. It was an extensive cover story. There was even a mission report, nicely forged in his handwriting. Opening a new file, Kakashi found baby pictures and a birth certificate, as well as a profile for his son. Hitaki Naruto, 18 months old, born April 3, allergic to bee stings and the pollen of a tree that only grew in the far northern reaches of Lightning Country. Weighing 18 kilograms, he stood 72 centimeters tall. Favorite color, orange. Any problems? Suggestions? Questions? Sarutobi prompted. Kakashi, still flicking through papers, hummed contemplatively. "What will we tell Pup?" he asked. "Naruto will be told the same as everyone else, until he is old enough to understand," Sarutobi said simply. Kakashi nodded, not looking up from his perusal. "How do you propose I make it seem as though we have just returned from a long journey?" he asked. Sarutobi tapped another sheet of paper, and Kakashi picked it up. And laughed. "Ah," he said, nodding. "The obvious approach. Of course." On the paper was a map, a travel path mapped out on it in red ink that would be easy enough for a child to navigate with a little help and would still make it appear as though whoever was walking it was coming from the general direction of Lightning Country. "I want you and Naruto to go on a little journey for me," Sarutobi said. "That will give the child, and you, time to adjust. He needs to address and react to you in a manner that depicts that you are his father, not some stranger he's just met. And you need a little time to get used to caring for a child before you hit the public eye, as well. I guarantee that the moment you step through Konoha's gates when you return you'll be scrutinized, so it would be best to be convincing. The whole trip should take around 2 weeks, and by the end I imagine both of you will look as though you have just made a difficult, tiring journey from a foreign country." Kakashi rolled his eyes. "Well, duh, when do I leave?" he asked resignedly. Sarutobi checked his watch, and Kakashi groaned loudly. Sarutobi laughed. "Kidding," he said. "Tomorrow. Take tonight to memorize those files. You need to know them perfectly. And I'd suggest you put some of the photographs in your pack. You know, in case. Oh, and don't forget when packing that you have to have room for all Naruto's gear, too." Grumbling under his breath, Kakashi gathered the files into his arms and stood, moving away before the old man could say anything to further rip his world to pieces and rearrange it into something frightening. Outside, he stopped to lean against the hallway wall, breathing irregularly as it hit him exactly what he'd just agreed to. He was a father. Back in his office, Sarutobi smiled at the ceiling and waited. After a pause of maybe 7 minutes, the door opened and Kakashi appeared again, glaring something awful. Wordlessly, without even looking down from a suddenly fascinating crack in the ceiling, Sarutobi held out Kakashi's porcelain mask that had been forgotten. He had to fight a laugh as Kakashi snatched it and sunshined away. 3 months old. The next morning, Kakashi woke up as usual exactly 3 minutes before his alarm went off and swung himself off his bunk, instantly alert. Upon confirming that he was indeed still safe, relatively, in his quarters in the ANBU HQ, he sat down and stared blankly at the whitewashed wall until his alarm went off, jerking him out of his stupor. He jumped and blearily rubbed his hand over his face, before beginning his morning rituals of washing, shaving, dressing and breakfasting. By the time he was done, it was 5 a.m. Here, Kakashi deviated from his normal pattern. Instead of grabbing his mask and moseying on down to meet up with his squad, collect a mission and leave, he swung his pack up onto his back, where it settled over his white standard-issue armor, his cloak tied to the outside of it in a neat roll. He hesitated over his mask, eventually deciding to place it over his face for the hell of it, and, after checking that he had left none of his personal effects in the room, strode out of his quarters for the last time. Walking slowly, he made his way through HQ, heading unwillingly but unerringly towards Naruto's bedroom. When he reached there, he pressed his hand onto the seal on the outside of the door, which was there to ensure only certain personnel could unlock the entrance to the kid's room, and as a way to keep the brat in one place, damn it. The seal accepted him, and he pressed the door open, unaccountably nervous. It was early. The blonde toddler was still fast asleep in his cot. Kakashi took a few steps into the room and turned the light on. The sudden brightness woke the child, and he began to move, his face screwing up in protest at the light and a hand coming up to grind into his eye, his other hand and legs moving, stuck, beneath his soft blanket. "Awa," he said blearily, looking around as he was lying down. He caught sight of Kakashi standing nearby and frowned at his upside-down view of the man. "Doggy?" he said questioningly. Kakashi hesitated one last time. This was his last chance to make a break for it. "Good morning, pup." Naruto," Kakashi stumbled. Had to get used to calling the brat by his name. Would look weird otherwise. Naruto sat up, still scrubbing at his eye. The blanket fell down to reveal his right arm clamped around that ragged toy dog Mouse had gotten him 2.5 years ago. "Wah, doggy?" "Yes, Fu Naruto, it's me. Come on, we need to leave. You're going to live with me from now on, okay? So we're going to have to leave now. We need to pack up your things, okay?" The blonde stared at him throughout this uncomfortable speech, and the only reply he gave was to raise his free arm in the universal child signal for, "Pick me up." Kakashi obliged awkwardly, but it wasn't nearly as difficult as it had been last time he'd tried it, when he was 14. Now, Naruto put a remarkably strong arm around his neck and sort of clung there himself, and all Kakashi needed to do was prop him up with his left forearm hooked under the boy's short, chubby thighs. Letting his pack slip to the ground, Kakashi nudged it open with his foot and withdrew several storage scrolls, and set about sorting through the boy's belongings. Really, he didn't have much, compared to many devil spawnings. Children, Kakashi knew, and he reasoned he'd be able to bring just about all of it. Soon, it was done. Naruto was all but asleep on his shoulder. Kakashi was highly uncomfortable. "Okay, we're going to leave now, Naruto," he said softly. "You just sleep. We're going on a little trip. You won't be coming back here." He turned to leave the room, but a small voice below his left ear said, "Why?" "Oofige, bonky." Kakashi closed his eye. He honestly had no frickin' clue what the child had just told him. He had to teach him to speak better, even if that meant talking to him constantly. Sweeping the room with his gaze, he saw that the only thing he hadn't picked up was the soft blue blanket on the bed. With a sigh, he lifted it, and, shuffling Naruto carefully, managed to lay it over his shoulder and lay Naruto on top of it, ensuring that it would only fall and get lost if he dropped Naruto, and face it. That just wasn't happening. Somehow, Kakashi managed to stuff the filled scrolls into his pack and navigate the bag onto his back without dropping the toddler, but by the time he was done, he had a death grip on the small body, convinced he was about to fall, convinced that if he did fall, he'd break his neck and die. He just felt so fragile, so small, clinging so trustingly to an elite assassin. It almost seemed a crime to hold something so soft and innocent so close to such a blood-saturated soul as Kakashi's. Naruto wriggled uncomfortably, and Kakashi made a conscious effort to relax his grip just slightly before the blonde woke up completely from his doze. We're going to go now," the silver-haired man said uncomfortably. He wasn't used to narrating his life for others. He didn't even enjoy telling those he was directing where he was going to be and what he was going to do. And the kid wasn't exactly answering. But he did have to sort of talk to him, right? Kakashi wasn't good at small talk, so telling the baby everything he was doing was a good way to fill up his word quota. Readjusting the child in his arms until he was holding him up against his chest with both arms, the boy's legs around his waist and small arms hugging his neck, soft gold hair tickling his ear as Naruto rested his head on his shoulder, Kakashi exited the room, moving swiftly and covertly to escape ANBU headquarters. He really didn't want to run into any ANBU members and be forced to say goodbye. In fact, he had plans to be well out of the village by the time a morning meeting was called and the force as a whole was informed that he had been discharged. He hated goodbyes, and hellos, and talking in general. People were annoying. Naruto began to wake up and got increasingly more and more squirmy as the day progressed. By about 7 o'clock, Kakashi placed him on the ground to walk along beside him, bidding him to stay close and keep up. Half an hour and 500 meters later, he realized that a simple command hadn't really gotten through to the 3-year, 18-month-old boy who had never been outside before. That he could remember, at least. "Naruto, come on," he said, as the toddler stopped yet again to examine a flower. Those blue eyes flashed up to Kakashi's still masked face and a pout formed. The boy looked dangerously near refusing to obey, so Kakashi gritted his teeth and took the dreaded step. He held out his hand to the blonde. Instantly, through part delight and part conditioned response, Naruto slipped his much smaller hand trustingly into Kakashi's large one, consenting to being pulled along at a slow walk. It wasn't long before Naruto started flagging, lagging behind and relying more heavily on Kakashi to pull him along. The Junin cast him mind about, trying to figure out what was wrong, before he realized that the toddler wasn't used to walking very far at all. But they had a long journey. Kakashi tried to think back to when he'd been 3. He had vague memories of trips out of village with his father when he'd been very young, before his father had gotten so incredibly busy. Ignoring the hot shards of pain that always lanced through his heart whenever he thought of his father, Kakashi mentally reviewed the man's strategy for caring with his young son when they were going to be walking for a long time. Kakashi remembered he would walk in the morning, after breakfast, and then inevitably get tired after an hour or so and be carried by his father, falling asleep on the man's back or shoulder, until he woke up and they ate lunch. Then he would either walk some more or demand a ride on his father's shoulders, and he would be alternately carried or walk until the sun went down, and they stopped to make camp, eat dinner, listen to Tucson and occasionally Jiraiya-sama, if he was there, tell stories, and sleep the night. Right, Kakashi could do this. He nodded decisively. He would follow the same general pattern, he decided, reaching for Naruto to lift him off his tired feet. He would carry him for a while, until… Wait, dinner, lunch, breakfast. Kakashi swore aloud when he realized he had completely forgotten to feed the kid. Naruto wasn't one of his ANBU teammates who'd slept in and needed to be roused. He had a responsibility to supply food. Well, that makes it break time, I guess, Kakashi thought dryly, deciding to stop right there beneath the trees. Without further fuss, he simply folded his legs and sank onto the leaf litter with a certain trained grace, crossing his long legs beneath himself. Naruto looked at him curiously for a moment, before he mimicked the older man, sitting down with a clumsy thump and crossing his short, stubby legs, wide blue eyes watching the older Konohan for a clue as to what was going on. "Are you hungry, Naruto?" Kakashi asked, digging in his backpack. It was impossible to miss the way that the toddler's eyes lit up. "Hungry," he shouted, clapping his hands. "Eat, please?" "Yes, you can have breakfast now," Kakashi said absently, still rooting through his pack. Eventually, he came up with a soft bread sandwich, toddler-friendly, which he handed to the boy, making grabby motions at him and edging closer on his bottom eagerly. Kakashi had to restrain a wince at how enthusiastically the baby began to eat. "Okay, I have to remember to feed him. Important." Carefully reaching up, he removed the white and red mask that was fitted over his face with a sigh. He should probably stop wearing it, he admitted to himself. He wasn't in ANBU anymore. He let a finger trace over the pattern of a snarling dog that was painted onto it before quickly tying it onto the outside of his backpack. A glance told him Naruto is staring at him, mouth open, giving Kakashi a nauseating view of a bite of half-chewed bread and butter. "Ew, what?" he asked. Naruto chewed twice and swallowed rapidly, emptying his mouth enough that he could level one finger at Kakashi's nose and say, "Or face off." "Oops, me." Kakashi closed his eye, mentally analyzing that. What the hell? Was the kid even speaking the same language as him? What was he trying to say? Well, it probably had something to do with his mask coming off. Come to think of it, the only person Naruto had ever seen without a mask was the Hokage. "Yes, I took my mask off," he said, taking a guess and hoping he got the kid's meaning right. "This is my face." Well, kinda. He didn't want to remove his Hite-8 and cotton face mask as well. Naruto narrowed blue eyes warily at him. "Doggy?" he asked suspiciously. Kakashi blinked. Was the kid? Either way, it would be best to change the form of address now, to give them both time to get used to it. "Daddy," Kakashi enunciated clearly, touching his own chest. "Daddy." Naruto tilted his head, confusion written over his face. D? He repeated uncertainly. Kakashi nodded. Daddy, he confirmed. I'm Daddy. Daddy. Naruto sounded marginally more sure. Kakashi nodded. Now, eat your food. We need to get moving. After a long pause, during which Naruto frowned at the man almost skeptically, he turned back to chewing his bread with half a set of teeth. The rest had yet to grow through. Kakashi sighed with relief. Hurdle 1 down. Now, he was up for 2 fun weeks of father-son bonding. A weary teenager heaved a small child a little higher on his hip. Though he could usually carry weights much heavier than 18 kilograms for much longer than he'd been carrying this one, it was a totally illogical but cruelly true law of the universe that young children got heavier the longer you carried them. Naruto was resting his cheek against Kakashi's shoulder. His blanket was draped around him like a cloak to keep the evening chill away, and Oink was crushed between his stomach and Kakashi's chest. He was holding a plastic baby's bottle filled with formula that had been mixed with water from Kakashi's flask and heated with a mild kaiden jutsu. He was sucking on it slowly, his eyes heavy. He did hope Daddy would find a place to stop soon. He was really tired, but couldn't sleep well when he was being jostled by the man's movements. They had been out here in this strange place for a long time, more bedtimes than Naruto could count. He liked it out here, with big green and brown fresh-smelling things Daddy had told him were called trees, and weird things that moved all by themselves but were neither doggies nor froggies, but he liked it most of all because Daddy was with him all the time and he was never left alone. Dimly, Naruto realized Daddy had stopped and was setting out a sleeping bag with one hand. The first night they'd spent out here, Naruto had had a bad dream, and Daddy had picked him up and hugged him until they fell asleep together. Ever since then, Naruto would always curl up against Daddy and go to sleep right there when they stopped. He liked this bit of the day the best, and he didn't even like bedtime. But Daddy was big and strong and brave and scary, and he made the bad dream monsters stay away, and Naruto loved snuggling up against his chest and feeling his strong arms hug him and knowing that when he woke up Daddy would be right there. Daddy, he said sleepily as he found himself set on the ground and the other man began to unbuckle his small shoes. Yes, Naruto? Daddy answered. Naruto was too sleepy to even really look at him as he said, When we go a air? Daddy had said they were going somewhere special, to a new home where they were going to live. Over the last few days, he told Naruto quite a bit about it, and Naruto wanted to know how long until they reached the mysterious place. Long time, Naruto, Daddy grunted, slipping into the sleeping bag and carefully lowering Naruto onto his chest, arranging the boy comfortably. A week and a half, or more. Naruto nodded drowsily even though he didn't understand, his eyes closing as he slipped into unconsciousness. For a while, Kakashi lay and looked down at the soft blonde hair that obscured his vision, even though he was exhausted and couldn't seem to get enough sleep these days. As bizarre as it was, Naruto had taken to him like a duck to the water. It would be easier than he had supposed to convince Konoha they were a family when they arrived in 1 or 2 weeks' time. There would be no need to explain away Naruto's standoffish behavior, simply because he didn't display any. No, all that would be needed was an act on Kakashi's part. A show of fatherly affection towards the kid. It didn't need to be overdone, either. Kakashi winced at the thought of acting like those simpering idiots who fawned over their kids. No, that would fool no one. No, he just needed to pretend he loved the brat. He'd been practicing for the last couple of days, and he thought he'd gotten pretty good at it. The ex-ANBU effortlessly squashed the twinge of guilt he felt in his soul at deceiving the child like this, especially since it was obvious the toddler had, through some miracle, bonded with him. But Naruto didn't ever need to know that Daddy's affections were false. He'd even gotten better at interpreting the baby babble. Absently, Kakashi raised a hand to smooth and pet the downy soft blonde hair, shifting a little so he could see the boy's face. Naruto was fast asleep, sucking his thumb unconsciously, his half-full bottle lying forgotten in his other hand. Kakashi frowned a little, one gloved hand moving to tug the thumb out of Naruto's small mouth. He'd have to break that habit. Instantly, with a rustle of cloth, Oink's fluffy tail took the place of Naruto's thumb in the child's mouth, and Naruto snuggled deeper into his blankets, sucking firmly on the plaything. Kakashi winced. That definitely explained why the toy was so tattered. Breaking the habit had suddenly become a top priority. Right below toilet training, Even if it was kind of, cute. Relief coursed through Kakashi. He had just spotted the gates that allowed entrance into Konoha up ahead. They were home. The journey that had easily been the most exhausting and nerve-wracking of his life, including that time he'd had to drag home an unconscious teammate from Iwa whilst nursing a stomach wound and being chased by a small army, was finally over. It had been a trying 2 weeks. Were children supposed to leak like that? Naruto, who was walking on his own this morning, holding Oink, noticed the gates about 10 minutes later and stopped short. "Daddy, ISSR? We air?" he asked, blue eyes turning to his guardian for confirmation. Kakashi glanced at him and nodded. "Yes, Naruto. This is Konoha, home," he corrected himself. "This is home." Those familiar eyes lit up and suddenly the toddler transformed into some kind of miniature yellow flash as he darted ahead, moving with mind-boggling speed the way only a toddler can. "No, you don't," Kakashi muttered, quickly flashing through some hand signs, activating a jutsu a kindly innkeeper had shown him 2 nights ago. A chakra leash activated and snapped out to catch Naruto, pulling the pouting boy gently back to his father's side. "No FA, he whined. "Yes, fair," Kakashi countered. "Remember what I said about running off? Bad Naruto." Instantly, the baby's expression turned from excited but thwarted to horrified and contrite. "I'm sore," he wailed, latching onto Kakashi's leg. Kakashi sighed and patted his head. "It's alright, just try to remember next time, okay? You could get hurt, running off alone." Naruto nodded, a toddler's promise to be good, and together the pair approached the gates. One of the 2 Chunin guarding the gate glanced up as they came into his field of vision. Seeing only a young man and a small child, not likely to be threat, he glanced back down, only to do a double take as the man's identity and the fact he was traveling with a toddler of all things made it through to his head. Kakashi-san, yelped Chunin A. Kakashi neither knew nor cared what his name was, tired as he was. "Why, you're back," stuttered Chunin B. Kakashi nodded once as he paused at their booth, his single eye sparing them a glance before fixing back on Naruto with parental paranoia. "The village has missed you," offered Chunin A. Kakashi spared a second in his Naruto watching to shoot him a dull look. Chunin A. winced. Who is this?" Chunin B. tried, looking at where a small blonde person was trying his utmost to push the heavy gate into the village closed. "His name is Hitaki Naruto," Kakashi said shortly. "He has no passport. However, as an ANBU, I can authorize his entry. So just mark my name on your list and wave us through, okay?" Yeah, you can do that," Chunin B agreed quickly, scrawling something down on the nearest scroll. "Go on through. Don't forget to hand in your report, and, it's good to see you back, Kakashi-san." Kakashi gave a snort of disbelief, but summoned Naruto to his side with a tug on the chakra leash and moved through the gates. Chunin A didn't seem able to let it go. "Wait, Hitaki Naruto, is he related to you? Like, your kid, or, ouch." Kakashi smirked without turning to see what had happened. He knew. Chunin B had just stomped Chunin A's uncovered toes. Quite hard, from the sound of it. Beside and below him, Naruto was practically writhing in excitement, and Kakashi idly wondered how long until he exploded. He could practically hear the kid's gears whirring 10 times faster than usual, trying to keep up. His head swiveled, obviously attempting to take in everything going on around him as they began their, way too long, walk to the Hokage tower to report, Naruto sliding his small hand into his father's for a measure of reassurance in the new, exciting and slightly frightening place. They had nearly made it when. Dynamic entry. "Ah, crap," Kakashi said, firmly and loudly. Glancing down, he tugged on the hand in his. "You're never to say that word, you hear?" he said sternly to the kid. Naruto, who had been watching a confrontation between a pigeon and a shopkeeper on the other side of the road, turned his big eyes up to look at Daddy. "Wah," he said, thumb in mouth and Oink balanced precariously on his elbow. Kakashi twitched. "Cute, my youthful rival Kakashi, you have returned, Yosh. Today the springtime of youth are in full bloom. It is good to see you again, my friend." Naruto, suddenly devoid of the adventuring courage he'd possessed until the spandex-wearing creature had appeared before them, tugged his hand out of Kakashi's and suckered himself to the man's left leg like some kind of particularly stubborn barnacle. Wrapping his arm around Kakashi's shin, his cheek rested neatly in the cleft of Kakashi's knee, his other thumb still firmly in his mouth. "I have missed you, rival Kakashi," Guy was declaring to the rapidly emptying street. "Do not think I have forgotten our competition. No, you will not escape that easily. The flames of youth will triumph over your hip and coolness. The score currently stands at 15-16 in my favor. We shall." "Oh, who is this champion of youth who stands close to you?" Kakashi debated the pros and cons of several answers, but Naruto saved him the trouble by pulling his thumb out of his mouth with a wet popping noise and slapping the slimy, "ew" hand over his left ear, saying, "E-O-U, daddy." "Owie." Kakashi bit back a snigger. "Yes, he is," he agreed, patting the blonde head consolingly. Guy looked from tall to short Hitaki and back again. "Kakashi, am I right in thinking that you understand his youthful words?" he asked, slightly confused. Kakashi nodded shortly. "I do," he said. "He's loud, daddy." "Ouch. So, please." Inside voices, "Guy, you're hurting his ears." "Ah, I am sorry, young Guy." Inside voices, "I am sorry, my young friend." Guy tried again. "I will keep my voice lowered. And if I can't, I will swim 50 lengths of the river whilst chewing rocks." "And then, did you say, daddy?" Kakashi sighed slightly. He was torn between amusement and dread at this conversation. "Ah, well, might as well get it over with." Squaring his shoulders, he said, "I did. Guy, this is my son. Naruto, this is Guy-san." For a moment, Guy looked remarkably un-Guy-like. His grin slid off his face, to be replaced with a grim sort of expression Kakashi had rarely seen, which looked rather out of place on Guy's features. "Your son?" he repeated seriously. "Who is his mother?" "Girl from the village I was staying in," Kakashi said, meeting the green-clad Chunin's eyes unflinchingly. Guy frowned at him. "Kakashi, my friend, while I understand you wishing to keep your son, was it not perhaps unwise to tear a son from his mother?" Guy asked in a low voice, dark concern tinging his question. "After all, what do you know about raising a child?" Hung unsaid but unmistakable in the air between felt himself stiffening and drawing up to stand at his full height in a response to the query, one hand reaching to rest possessively on Naruto's messy head. "Kita is dead," he said flatly. "It was accept responsibility for the child or abandon him for his village to raise. I believe I took the only option." Guy closed his eyes for a moment at the news, and Kakashi cringed as was he suddenly enveloped in a hug. "I am sorry for your loss. The loss of love at such a young age as ours. My heart bleeds for you, my rival." This was shouted at the top of Guy's powerful lungs, right into Kakashi's right ear. "Can't breathe," he muttered, and Guy eventually released him. Tears were streaming down the other man's cheeks. Kakashi winced. "He cries so easily." Again, he swore he heard Obito's hysterical laughter. "Guy, it's okay. Really. It was 18 months ago when Naruto was born. I'm fine. Seriously, Guy, stop crying." Tears are unyouthful? There we go." Guy wiped his eyes, the flood of manly sobs dying down rapidly. In a few moments, he was calm enough to grin again. He knelt before the Hitaki pair, putting himself roughly on Naruto's level. The blonde surveyed the weirdo warily. "Hello, most excellent and youthful child of my rival, Kakashi," he said brightly. "I am Meta Guy, Konoha's green beast." Naruto frowned, tilted his head, looked Guy up and down with his bright blue eyes, and then leaned around his father's leg and said clearly, "Froggy." Then he placed his thumb in his mouth and held up his other hand for his father to lift him. As Kakashi obeyed, hoisting the child into the air, he couldn't help it. He began to laugh. A small shadow crept across the floor, raised up on tiptoes to minimize noise. Sunlight peeked in through the window and bounced off bright golden hair, making the shadow shine a little in the small, one-room apartment. Grinning, Naruto took 2 more steps and pounced. Kakashi jolted awake as something small cannonballed his stomach. "Oof. Daddy up up up." Naruto squealed from his midriff. Unfortunately, by the time Kakashi realized who had attacked him, he was halfway through a counter move and a second later had Naruto pinned beneath him, one arm firmly behind him and a kunai pressed at the back of his neck. There was a 2-second pause before Kakashi snatched the knife away and let Naruto's twisted arm go, pushing himself up to get his weight off the small, fragile body. He felt sick. Naruto was so small, he must have hurt him. He'd attacked him. A baby. He was a horrible guardian. Naruto would be injured, and the Hokage would take him away and give him to someone else. And why was his chest hurting? And he didn't have time for this. And oh god, is Naruto hurt? Why isn't he moving? Shit. The boy then did something that threw Kakashi's panicking mind for a loop. He started giggling. Naruto had been stunned when Daddy had flipped him over and pinned him face down on the mattress, and it had taken a moment to realize what had happened, and then that he'd been let go. Then, he'd started to laugh. Daddy was good at playing. This was a fun game. Sitting up, he squirmed around until he was facing Daddy once more and dived at him again, head-butting his chest and attempting, futilely, to force Daddy back down on the bed. One of Daddy's arms came up around him, pinning him again against the man's chest this time, and Naruto squealed happily, wriggling energetically in his grip. Kakashi's mind was frozen, unsure of how to respond to this situation. Clearly, the blonde wanted revenge for pinning him down like that. Kakashi's gut clenched guiltily. But he was grinning like a mad thing and his squeals didn't sound angry, scared or frustrated. No, instead he seemed almost happy. Kakashi was suddenly seriously concerned there was something very wrong with the boy. Naruto had managed to squirm out of his grasp, but just leapt right back at his father, this time aiming higher. Kakashi's body reacted automatically before his mind could stop it, grabbing the attacker out of the air, twisting him around and catching him in a headlock. Kakashi froze. Crap, once was enough, but then I went and did it again. Even if he wasn't injured before, he certainly was now. What do I do? I can't keep him around if I can't keep myself from attacking him. Crap, I must have heartburn, my chest hurts. The train of thought was cut off as once again, Naruto began shrieking with laughter and squirming in his arms. Gone! He shouted at the top of his lungs, in between writhes and shrieks of laughter. Gone, gone, gone. He managed to tear himself out of Kakashi's loose grip and instantly launched a new attack. Kakashi grabbed him, mind worrying. Was he saying, "Again"? Was he having fun? He wasn't hurt? He wasn't scared? Could that be real? Looking down at the grinning blonde, however, Kakashi had to concede that yes, he was having fun. This was all a big game to the toddler. Hell, I want to live in Naruto's mind, he thought to himself, hesitantly reaching to swing the child into the air and then toss him gently down onto the mattress again. It had been 3 days since they had returned to Konoha. Kakashi had set up a crib in his small, one-room apartment, but the little brat had recently figured out how to escape from it. Bloody imaginative children. Child safe should mean child safe, damn it. Rolling his eyes and shoving the brat down when he tried to squirm to his knees, Kakashi mused that there were days he could truly appreciate that Naruto was indeed Kushina's son. Naruto was happily seated on his blankie, which was spread out on the limited floor space of Daddy's apartment, happily arranging the painted wooden blocks Daddy had given him, occasionally lifting one to chew absently. There were noises outside the closed door, but he didn't listen to them, too intent on his game. 4, 5, here we are. This is Kakashi-san's house. Are you sure? Yeah, number 6. Come on, Kurenai, I want to see the baby. Dad says it's real cute. I heard it looks nothing like him. I'm not even convinced the baby exists, with all the rumors flying around. Oh, hey, Genma, are you visiting Kakashi-san too? Yeah, I'm curious as to how he got the kid in the first place. I'd figure the usual way, Genma. You think? I just always thought Kakashi was too. I don't know, frigid for any kind of intimate interaction. Che, please, there's a complete difference between shunning human contact and refusing. Anko, why are you here? Same reason you are, dumbass. To see the baby. Well, mostly to see if I can get into Kakashi's pants, but it amounts to the same thing, really. What? No, it doesn't. That's sick, Anko. Cough, cough, cough. Hey, Yugo and Hayate. You here to see the kid, too? Duh. Cough, cough. Yes. Cough. The door swung open and Naruto glanced up from his game to see a whole bunch of people there. But they didn't move, so he ignored them, unaware or uncaring of their conversation. That's him? Why is he alone? Cough, cough. Are we sure Kakashi is up to being a dad? He has to be. He doesn't have a choice, Yugo. He doesn't look anything like Kakashi. I don't know, he seems familiar. Well, I don't even think they're related. Cough, cough. How old is it, anyway? He is 18 months old. He's big. I don't think he's Kakashi's kid. Cough, cough, cough. Yes, we heard, Asuma. Now shut up. All I can say is, she must have been hot to finally break down Kakashi. Anko, Kakashi's been sleeping with people for years. Mission stuff. He just doesn't do it for recreation. Man, what a tool. Cough, cough. Don't be mean. He didn't notice that the watching crowd had gone silent as he spelled out, doggy, froggy, yes, up, and a funny arrangement he'd been shown by Bear that always got interesting results out of the grown-ups. When he was done, he had about 6 blocks left over. He examined them, but couldn't make any more words out of the sounds painted on them, so with a sound of disgust, he lifted one of them and threw it at the bucket they'd been stored in, which was standing at the opposite end of the blankie. He'd been taught how to throw stuff by a pair of the white-faced men, and had lots of fun practicing it, so he quickly threw the remaining 5 blocks at the bucket, grinning delightedly at the clanging sounds they made when they landed neatly in the metal container. The watching teenagers had begun whispering again. Cough, cough. Did you see that? He's 18 months old. Well, it's definitely Kakashi's kid. Bang goes the baby snatcher theory. He's so cute. Cough, cough, cough. Look at the words he spelled. He got shuriken right. How did he do that? Oh, great, another super freak. Cough. Kakashi will be horrible. There'll be no living with him. Come on, let's go inside. I'm sick of standing in the hallway. Naruto looked up in alarm as there was a sudden movement and all at once a half-dozen strangers rushed inside, right at him. Instantly, he screamed, flinching backwards as he shrieked at the top of his lungs in the desperate hope that Daddy would come and rescue him. There was a loud crash and a tinkle, and Daddy burst through the window in a shower of broken glass, landing in front of his son in a battle-ready position. Kunai out in a feral father mode, touch my son and die look in his eye. Naruto stopped screaming and instead grinned at the suddenly petrified strangers. After a moment, Daddy seemed to relax, lowering the shiny knife thing Naruto was never allowed to touch. Asuma? Kurenai? Genma? Yugo? Hayate? Anko? Do I even want to know why you are causing my son to scream in holy terror? He asked darkly. The others winced in unison. Hayate moved his hand to his mouth and his shoulders shook as he coughed. We didn't mean to scare him, Kurenai said softly. We didn't know he'd be afraid of us. He has a good head on his shoulders. Stranger danger, and all that, Kakashi retorted, placing his kunai back in his pouch and turning to lift the toddler, making desperate, up, motions off the glass shard-covered ground. Asuma, Genma, I'm choosing to blame you, meaning that it's now your job to fix the window I just finished repairing when I was forced to crash through it to rescue my son from unknown assailants. The guests had the grace to look ashamed, and Asuma and Genma began to mutter their agreement while the others sheepishly tried to sweep or gather up the sharp glass pieces. Within 20 minutes, the apartment was cleaned and child-safeified to Kakashi's satisfaction. He settled on the bed, holding a shy Naruto on his lap, and said, okay. Now that he isn't in danger in his own home, cue dirty, contrite looks. This is my son, Hitaki Naruto. Naru, these are a bunch of idiots. Say hello. Happy now that Daddy was holding him, Naruto flashed a smile around the room and waved a small hand, saying, Io. Okay, why are you all here? Kakashi asked before his guests could speak. The group of teenagers in his apartment alternately frowned, grinned and coughed. To see the baby, silly. Yugo said brightly, patting Hayate on the back as he dissolved into a coughing fit. Kakashi frowned at him suspiciously. He had better not get Naruto sick, he threatened ominously. Okay, you've seen him, can you leave now? Ah, Kakashi-kun, pouted Anko, sitting close to him on the bed and sliding her arm around his back. Yeah, Kakashi, don't be mean, Genma added. We brought presents, Kurenai announced, offering Kakashi the brightly wrapped package. Wouldn't be a baby shower without them. Agreed Asuma, his grin positively evil. There was a pause as everyone waited for Kakashi's reaction. I hate you all, he said dully. Fine, have at it. Naruto's eyes had lit up and he reached for the shiny, bright-colored box held in the tall woman with red eyes hands. Pweti, he cooed as his father allowed him to catch and chew the ribbon it was tied with. Kakashi seriously considered setting off a bomb just to clear his apartment. If not for the fact that Naruto was also in the room, he probably would have. Knock knock, called a cheerful voice from the open doorway. Kakashi glanced up and groaned aloud when he saw some of the adults, his sensei's generation, poking their heads in. We heard there was a party going on here, Inoichi said brightly. I'm hungry, commented Shuza as he forced his way through teenagers, somehow squeezing into the small room. All this baby stuff is so troublesome, Shikaku added, dropping a box onto the gradually growing pile on the table. I wouldn't even be here, but my wife nags, and when Sume told her, man, marriage sucks. And the kid cries, you know? He's not even properly toilet trained. Ick. His blonde friend patted his shoulder sympathetically. I know what you mean. My daughter's impossible. Everyone, make a hole. Sume began bodily shoving at the people between her and the teenaged boy cowering on the bed, curled protectively around the baby. People scrambled and banged into each other, trying to tackle the logistical nightmare that was allowing movement in the overly crowded room. Soon, Sume had made it to the bed, and she quickly shoved Anko aside so she could sit next to their host. Give me the baby, she ordered. Kakashi hesitated, but didn't really dare to disobey, so he cautiously handed a very clingy Naruto over to the wild woman. Naruto looked at him like he'd been betrayed, and Kakashi cringed, but didn't move to take him back. Sume was examining him, looking at him with her sharp brown eyes. He's cute, but he looks nothing like you, she commented. How old? 18 months, Kakashi muttered. Sume grinned. He's big, she remarked. That's good. Is he a handful? My two uns keep me run off my feet, let me tell you. Who was his mother? Her name was Kita, Kakashi ground out, mentally contemplating the pros and cons of suicide. Picture? Sume said in a clipped voice, arranging a squirming blonde child on her lap so that he couldn't escape. Kakashi dug in his pocket and pulled out the rather battered photograph of the fictitious woman he'd been given. Sume took it and clucked. Well, he definitely takes after her. Let me see, Anko demanded, grabbing it. Ooh, she was hot. See, Genma? The photograph was quickly passed around the room. Yes, he does definitely take after her, Kurenai said, holding the picture. But he has his father's eyes, see? Yugo added. His mother's color, but his father's shape. Kakashi suddenly joined Hayate in coughing. Yeah, I can see that. Sume agreed, peering at the kid. He smells similar too. Cough, cough, cough. Dynamic entry. Guy leapt through the empty window pane. Kakashi, did you know your window seems to be missing? Yeah, Guy, Kakashi sighed, reclaiming Naruto, who looked like he might cry at the arrival of the loud and green one. The idiots broke it. He jerked his head at his guests. Yosh, how unyoutful. I shall fix your window, my friend. If I cannot, I shall do 500 laps of the village. On one foot. Where did Kakashi-san go? Kakashi had used the distraction Guy was to grab the toddler and run, and was now walking calmly down the street 3 blocks away while in his arms Naruto laughed and hugged him, and then began to suck his thumb again. Reaching to tug the thumb out of his son's mouth, Kakashi sighed heavily. If every day was like today, he wasn't sure he'd survive parenthood. Naruto, get that out of your mouth. Naruto looked up, all innocent eyes and cute expressions. The effect was somewhat marred, however, by the kunai he was currently chewing the handle of, his hand awkwardly holding the somewhat dull but still sharp enough to cause damage blade. Kakashi was not impressed. Naruto, he growled warningly. Put that down. The blonde considered and, wisely, chose to obey, quickly placing the knife back on the table where he'd found it. Naruto, you know you're not allowed to touch daddy's kunai, Kakashi said sternly. I don't care if you wanted it, I don't care if you could reach it. It's against the rules. Naruto had the grace to look shamefaced. Sorry, not good enough. Why aren't you allowed to touch them? Kakashi pressed. Naruto bit his lip, tears forming in his eyes. Because, I see and get, her, he sniffed. And, you know me her. Right, Kakashi agreed. Inwardly, he was wondering how long it would take before Naruto no longer was reduced to tears each time Kakashi showed the slightest bit of displeasure in him or his conduct. No park today, he said firmly. He felt a bit guilty, really, playing in the park was the only truly childish thing the kid did, but he couldn't keep picking up his kunai like that. Maybe it was time to start letting him use them rather than the wooden training ones Kakashi had been teaching how to throw and fight with. In that way, he'd certainly get a better appreciation for the deadly items. Another voice riled at the idea. He's just a baby, it argued, give him another year or so yet. Naruto nodded tearfully. "I'm sorry, Daddy," he repeated, much more sincerely. "Okay," Kakashi said, holding out his hand. Naruto toddled over and crawled into his lap, curling up against his chest with a sniff. Leaning back and looking up at the ceiling, Kakashi held the boy for a while, simply waiting for him to realize that the adult wasn't mad at him and he'd been forgiven. 1.5 years into this crazy assignment, Kakashi was much better at acting his part. Having read a great many books on parenting, he had quickly become familiar with such ideas as timeout, clear boundaries, providing safe environments, frequent praise, and even recognizing and rewarding good behavior. Kakashi was proud to say he managed to follow the guidelines fairly well, all things considered. He'd been removed from active duty ever since he'd come home and had been given a monthly allowance comprised of pay for both long service leave and some bastardized version of maternity leave. At least, that's what the others Kakashi's age called it. Really, it was ongoing pay for his mission, but no one was to know that. As a result, he'd spend a lot, if not all, of his time with the kid. Unable to think of anything better to do, he'd started taking him training, teaching him the basics of being a ninja. He hoped that this didn't count as pressuring the child or putting unfair expectations on him. All the books agreed that such behavior was extremely detrimental. Naruto shifted in his arms and hugged him, a slightly chubby cheek resting on his collar. Kakashi automatically hugged him back. "Love you, Daddy," the small child sniffed. "Sorry. It's okay, Naruto," Kakashi repeated. "I love you too." Yes, he was used to speaking the words. He had gotten quite good at the affectionate touches that would reassure and comfort the child. That was another thing the books all said. A child had to feel loved, and there was no way Kakashi would let his sensei's son be miserable. Besides, the words were easy enough, if slightly out of place. Shinobi have no emotions, love included, and Kakashi was certainly no exception to the rule. But Naruto didn't need to know that. "Come on," Kakashi said, patting the boy's small back briskly. "Lesson time. I'll tell you what, if you do an extra hour today, I'll let it be your punishment, and you can still go to the park." "Yeah." The 3-year-old cheered, spinning and wriggling until he made his way back to his own seat and pulling his workbook towards him. Kakashi took time every day to teach him reading, writing and numeracy. In a couple of years he was going to move on to history and chakra theories. As a Hokage, he'd need all the help he could get if he was to live up to the Academy's expectations. Not that Kakashi really minded what the Academy teachers and other students thought of him. He was just astute enough to realize that Naruto would. Dragging his chair closer to Naruto's, he leant over the child and, leaning his arm on the wooden table, began to coach him through his learning. Kakashi was settled on a comfortable couch in the dimly lit living room. He had a book of advanced jutsu open in front of him, and his eye flicked over it lazily. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and Naruto was accordingly fast asleep in his bedroom, his bedtime being 5:30. Kakashi was just thinking of joining the kid. In fact, he was tired. Pakun was lying on his stomach, snoring loudly. Today, he'd summoned the pack to keep Naruto company for a while, mostly to try and get the blonde used to the animals. The other 7 dogs had decided to leave a couple of hours ago, but Pakun had opted to stay. With a snort, the dog woke up and raised his head jerkily, a floppy ear twitching and his nose quivering. "Huh?" he grunted in his gravely voice, sounding equal parts sleepy and curious. With a fond expression, Kakashi lowered his book and reached to scratch the pug's ear. "Dreaming, Pakun?" he asked. The dog closed his eyes blissfully, leaning into the caress. Right there, a little to the left. I just thought I smelled Jiraiya-sama. I was dreaming of that time he trailed off sleepily, and to Kakashi's very great amusement his hind leg started to kick in response to the hand now scratching his neck. Within 2 minutes, Pakun had been reduced to a few sleepy, disjointed mumbles like, chasing cats, exploding, running, grr. Then, he sat up like he'd been electrocuted and stared intently at the front door. "Pakun, what is it?" Kakashi asked, instantly on guard. "I thought I just dreamed it, but I'm sure now," the pug growled. "I can smell." About then, the front door slammed open and an all too familiar voice shouted at the top of his powerful perverted lungs, "Hello. Kakashi. Oi, where are you, brat? I know you live here. Oh, there you are." Kakashi looked up dully as the legendary Sannin, the great Jiraiya, walked into his living room as if he owned it. "Jiraiya-sama, Please, the Hitachi said, giving Pakun one last pat and picking up his book again. The dog snorted in disgust and lay down again. It's late. You'll wake up the kid. What are you doing here? I came to see you, of course, Jiraiya retorted, sitting in one of the comfortable armchairs nearby. Wanted to visit, see how you were going. Maybe meet this new addition to the Hitachi family I heard tell about. Kakashi carefully didn't react. Jiraiya was the only other person in the world except for the Hokage who knew Naruto's true origins. The Sandaime had written to him right away when Naruto was killed, telling him of the death, and Jiraiya had stormed back to Konoha to scream and rage at his old teacher and make a great number of unfair accusations. Sarutobi had waited patiently until the Sannin had screamed himself hoarse before quietly explaining the truth. Ever since then, Jiraiya had been kept up to date on the boy's status, though this was the first time he'd actually come to visit. I had a hard time finding you, actually, Jiraiya was saying conversationally. I had no idea you were planning to move back into your father's house. I wasn't, Kakashi admitted. But I needed the space, and it didn't seem right to sell this place and buy another house. Damn brat, upending my whole life. They do that, Jiraiya agreed, grinning. Then he sobered. Is he happy? Kakashi considered the question that was so much heavier than the weight of the words themselves. Eventually, he nodded, once. I believe he is. He smiles often and laughs frequently, he said slowly. Jiraiya looked a little relieved. I brought him this, he said, holding out a stuffed toy frog. His doll Minato had one like it, and I thought. He trailed off awkwardly, hoping he hadn't offended the silver-haired man who for more than a year had been father to the boy. At length, Kakashi nodded and took the toy. I will give it to him, he promised shortly. The Sannin nodded, before his face split in a grin. Hey, don't think I've forgotten you, kid, he added loudly. Kakashi winced. If Naruto woke up, this idiot legend could be the one to settle him again. As your father's friend and your son's godfather, it is my sacred duty to introduce you to certain aspects of life, he declared. Kakashi took a moment to wonder when exactly he'd given permission for Jiraiya to become Hitachi Naruto's godfather, but shook it off as a lost cause. Something orange and rectangular was shoved into his face. Blinking, Kakashi cautiously took the object, looking at it with a measure of curiosity. Then he lobbed it right back at its owner, hissing like a demon, there is a child in the house. He can't read, Jiraiya protested, snatching the book out of the air. Kakashi raised his chin. Can too, he said stubbornly and childishly. Jiraiya blinked. Already? He said. I've been teaching him, Kakashi admitted. And I don't want porn in this house. Come on, Kakashi, wheedled Jiraiya. This new series I've got, Icha Icha. It's already a hit. You're 18 now, you should have some fun. Think of it as a belated birthday present. What better way to celebrate being a legal adult in all circles than to do something adult only? There is a child in this house. Kakashi said every word slowly and carefully, enunciating as clearly as possible through gritted teeth. Your godson, by the way. Oh, but if I ever find out he's been exposed to your corrupted teachings of birds and bees, in any form, at any age, I will kill you. Got it? Jiraiya sniffed and put the book back into his pocket. Fine, fine, he grumbled. Such a spoil sport. No fun at all. Well, at least take this one. Kakashi frowned suspiciously at the soft yellow book that was offered to him, but he quickly recognized it as Jiraiya's first book Naruto, which he knew was totally smut-free. He took it carefully. I know you already have your own copy from Minato, but I thought Naruto should have a copy, too, Jiraiya explained. So he can, see who he was named after. Kakashi nodded sharply, hands tightening around the book at the sharp reminder that he didn't name Naruto. Naruto wasn't his, didn't belong to him, this was just an act. Naruto would one day find out the truth and want nothing more to do with him. Why did the thought bother him? Why was his chest aching again? Bloody heartburn? You're probably right, he admitted grudgingly. He sighed and rubbed his temple. Look, not that I'm trying to get rid of you or anything, but I'm really tired, so do you think you could just, leave? Jiraiya grinned at him and opened his mouth to give a typical Jiraiya response. Loud, exaggerated and with a dance routine to match, but a small voice stopped him. Daddy? The two adults both turned and looked in the direction of the murmured word. Standing at the bottom of the stairs, one hand rubbing his eye and the other holding Oink's tail as the scruffy dog trailed along the floor after him. "Naruto?" Kakashi said, sitting up and unsettling Pakun, who yelped and slid to the floor. "What are you doing up this late?" The blonde hesitated for a moment before his face crumpled and he rushed forwards, meeting Kakashi in the middle of the living room as the older Hitaki stood and walked towards him. Dweam, he whimpered, holding up his arms. Kakashi didn't hesitate before swinging him up into his arms. "A bad dream?" Kakashi repeated, walking back to the couch and sitting back down on it. Pakun jumped up and curled up on the cushion next to them. "What did you dream about?" He held the trembling boy close as Naruto burst into tears and began to give him a broken description about being chased by big green monsters with huge fangs and red eyes. "And cool, in movin', was Scar," he wailed. Kakashi rubbed his back soothingly, seeming not to notice the snot and tears gradually wetting his chest, soaking through his shirt. Shush, you just stay right here with me. I won't let any monsters get you, ever." Pwami, Naruto asked, lungs heaving with the after effects of his tears. "I promise," Kakashi said seriously. "Any monster that comes after you, I'll kill before he can touch you. And Pakun can bite their monster ankles." Pakun growled on cue, bristling at an invisible monster. "Right, no one hurts Kakashi's pup." Grr. Naruto giggled, sounding much happier, and Kakashi ruffled his hair, holding him close to his chest and letting the sleepy 3-year-old fall back into sleep, comforted by his father's warm presence. Jiraiya took in the peaceful picture the two made, well aware and somewhat amused by the thought that he'd been totally forgotten. Soon, Naruto was happily sucking his thumb, snuggled against his father. Pakun had placed his head next to the boy in Kakashi's lap, and Kakashi had one hand on the small dog's head and the other arm hugging the blonde child. Jiraiya cleared his throat, and smirked as Kakashi's eyes snapped to him, surprised. "You still here?" he grumbled after a pause. "I'm going to put Naruto back to bed, okay?" "No, don't want a bed?" Kakashi sighed. He'd been sure Naruto was asleep, and he'd said the dreaded B word. "Crap, Naruto," he began, but it was no use. The blonde had sat up, stubbornly forcing his eyes open and dragging Oink up to hug. "Who dat?" he asked curiously, pointing a damning finger at Jiraiya. After a pause, Kakashi muffled a groan and bowed to the inevitable. "This is Jiraiya," he said. "He's your godfather, which means that he can help you if you ever need anything, and if anything ever happens to Daddy, or if Daddy is tied up in something and can't come home, he'll look after you." Silently, Kakashi vowed that he would never be that desperate. "That's right, brat," Jiraiya said instantly. "You can call me Gigi, huh? I'm your great and wonderful Jiraiya." Naruto shrunk back into his father as the other man struck a pose. Why did his daddy like so many weirdos? He said at length. Kakashi pulled him back against his broad chest again, putting his arms around him. Gigi was just leaving, he said, flawlessly making the adjustment, possibly easier than he usually would have, but after all, he had called Jiraiya Gigi right up until his father died. He just wanted to leave a couple of presents. "Here, he brought you a new toy, see?" He offered the child the stuffed toy frog Jiraiya had brought him. Naruto's blue eyes lit up. "Froggy," he cheered, reaching for it. "Ring Froggy." Kakashi sighed. Orange and a frog. Of course Naruto would love it. He carefully avoided Jiraiya's eyes and lifted the yellow book the Sannin had also brought. "He also gave you this," he said quietly. "It's a book about a ninja named Naruto." Naruto frowned. "Me Nam. Yes, your name," Jiraiya agreed before Kakashi could say anything. "In fact, you were named after the ninja in this book. Written by me, the great Jiraiya, Toad Sage, legendary Toad Sannin of Daddy?" Here, Naruto proved that he wasn't paying the slightest bit of attention and appealed to his father. "Read, please, for ICP?" Kakashi sighed yet again, but consented to lie back and let Naruto curl up on his chest. "Alright, but only a little bit, and then you have to go back to bed," he cautioned. Naruto nodded sleepily, and with an amused glance in a miffed Jiraiya's direction, Kakashi opened the book and began to read. The land of fire was in chaos. War had spread to every corner, and the once great nation was struggling to find its feet even as disaster ravaged it like a raging fire. Growing in the midst of this mayhem, safe for now in his hidden village, was a boy named Naruto. Kakashi awoke with a jolt. It was about 4 a.m. His internal alarm clock was blaring, waking him in time for, what did he need to do today? Oh, the Hokage groaned and debated rolling over and falling back to sleep, but a warm weight on his chest made him freeze. Looking down, he saw Naruto and Pakun tangled together, fast asleep. A glance around reminded him that he was in the living room, lying on the couch. His hand, dangling off the edge of the couch towards the floor, was resting on the cover of the book Naruto, which was open. Jiraiya was snoring in the armchair nearby. Sighing, Kakashi tapped Pakun until he woke up and said very quietly, "Hey, you can go. I won't need you today. Thanks for hanging around." Pakun yawned widely, showing his fangs, and nodded sleepily. "See ya, Kakashi," he slurred, disappearing with a pop. Stifling a yawn of his own, Kakashi looped his arms around Naruto and lifted him, cradling the soft body close as he sat up before gently laying him back on the couch and draping the blanket that was hung over the lamp. How'd that get there? Over his son to keep him warm. Within 15 minutes, he'd toileted, shaved, dressed and returned to the living room ready for the day. Walking quietly past the sleeping parties in the room, he made his way to the kitchen. Once there, he quickly stacked 3 pre-made bento boxes, and dug in the fridge for some food for himself. He ate quickly over the sink, ignoring the taste of the 3-day-old cold noodles, and tossed the empty container into the sink once he was done. Next, he pulled together a few sandwiches for Naruto's own breakfast and wrapped them in brown paper, stowing them in a pocket in his genin vest. He was still in shock, really. He couldn't believe the Hokage was making him do this. His mind absently wandered back 3 days. It was with some measure of trepidation that Kakashi answered the summons to the Hokage's office. "Ah, Kakashi." Sarutobi smiled at him as he walked in. Come in, come in. How have you been?" Kakashi took a few steps further into the room. "I left Naruto at the park with Sume to watch over him, sir," he said pointedly. Thankfully, Sarutobi got the message. "To business, then," he said. "I would like for you to take a genin team this year." Kakashi was sure he'd misheard. "That's funny," he said. "Really? I'm not joking. I have assigned you Squad 11. They graduate the day after tomorrow." The Hokage's face was serious. Kakashi took a step backwards. "But what do I do with Naruto?" he asked, feeling lost. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure you'll figure out something," he remarked. "But sir, I'm not the teaching type." Kakashi protested. "Not a negotiation," Sarutobi said pleasantly. "Be at the academy, day after tomorrow, to meet your team. Don't be late, now." "Funny," Kakashi muttered, ignoring the sting as the words reminded him of a certain always late Uchiha. So what if Kakashi had been a little late to some things recently? It was hard to keep to schedule when you have a toddler in the house. What the hell was he in for? 3 days later, Kakashi repeated the mental query to himself. What the hell was he in for? He'd met the brats yesterday, and compared to them, Naruto in a tantrum was a downright angel. He'd actually had to grab the girl before she was shoved off the edge of the roof by the 2 boys wrestling. Quickly stuffing a few things into his backpack, he filled Naruto's sippy cup with cold orange juice and moved out to the living room once again. Unceremoniously, he kicked Jiraiya hard in the shins, and the older man jerked awake with a strangled shout. "What the hell, brat?" he hissed, squinting at Kakashi. Kakashi smiled innocently. "I have an early appointment. You have to leave," he informed the Sannin. Jiraiya's eyes lit up. "I could watch Naruto for a bit, if you're busy," he offered hopefully. "Not a chance," Kakashi said flatly. Out. By the time he'd kicked a stumbling and swearing Jiraiya out of his house, it was 5 a.m. Kakashi took a deep breath, knowing that he was supposed to be meeting his genin right now. "Ah, well, Naruto," he said gently, kneeling next to the couch and rubbing the boy's back. "Time to get up, pup. Let's go. You and I are going to test a trio of imbeciles." Naruto moaned a little and tried to curl tighter into a ball. Kakashi chuckled and carefully lifted him. "Come on, let's get you dressed." Half an hour later, Naruto was dressed and sleeping on Kakashi's shoulder while he stalked towards a group of tired, impatient children. "You're late, sensei," accused one of the guys. What was his name? Kakashi really didn't care. From now on, he could be whiner. "Sorry about that," Kakashi said, his tone suggesting the opposite. "I got a little held up." Someone didn't want to wake up. He felt Naruto slipping and hoisted him higher on his hip. The other guy spoke up. Hey, what's that? Okay, he could be moron. This is a child. You may have seen one before. Konoha has quite an infestation of them. Kakashi's tone was light but dripped with dark sarcasm that screamed the warning, you're going down. The kids didn't seem to get it. Okay, but why is it here? The girl asked haughtily. Now, what to call her? Impudent brat who was questioning her superiors. Nah, that was too long. Just, brat, would do. First of all, he growled with some bite and enough killer intent to make the trio cringe. If any of you ever calls my son it, again, I'll feed your innards to my dogs and laugh as you scream. I don't care if you're bloody genin wannabes, no one screws with my family. There, that seemed to get his point across quite nicely. The children were shivering in their sandals. Weiner looked slightly green, while Brat looked on the verge of saying something dumb. Sure enough, she soon opened her mouth. My brother will, she began hotly, and Kakashi rolled his eyes. I outrank him, he interrupted. She looked affronted. How do you know? She demanded. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. Does your brother happen to be the Hokage? He asked. She shook her head. Then I outrank him. There was a pause while Kakashi let this sink in, before he let the key disappear suddenly and made an effort to appear more human. Okay, now that that's cleared up, he began, let's do this. You see these bells? He held up the twin silver objects and began rapidly explaining the basics of a typical bell test, such as he himself had been tested with. But, what about the kid? Moron asked when Kakashi gave the order to begin. Kakashi raised a silver eyebrow. Oh, don't worry about Naruto, he said lightly. It won't make any difference. Just pretend he's not here. Naruto, having heard his name, began to shift, rubbing his eyes sleepily. Daddy? He mumbled. MCP. Go home, now? Soon, Naru, soon, Kakashi assured him. I know it's early. You just go back to sleep and let daddy deal with the extras. Are you kids going to attack, or are you planning on just standing there staring like codfish? Not unexpectedly, it was Moron who attacked first, with a head-on charge typical of the race of the Moron. And Kakashi rolled his eyes before dodging it with grace. Naruto barely noticing the movement as he buried his face in his father's shoulder and nodded off again. Weiner was the next to attack, lobbing a series of sharp objects at the Junin. Again, Kakashi simply sidestepped, right into Brat, who was waiting with a glinting silver sword. The adult was pleased to see her holding it reasonably well, but when she attacked him, it was with an obvious, clumsy stroke that he could easily block with a kunai he grabbed from his pouch. Unfortunately, the movement required to pull out the weapon jostled Naruto into wakefulness rather abruptly. In an instant, the blonde screwed his face up and began to cry, signaling his displeasure in a typical tired toddler fashion. Oh, Naruto, Kakashi said, shoving Brat away with enough force to send her flying backwards. Did I wake you up? I'm sorry, pup. Do you want some juice? Juice? Naruto repeated hopefully, looking up from his tears. Kakashi handed him his brightly colored sippy cup, and Naruto took it eagerly. Kakashi lowered him to sit cross-legged on the grassy ground and patted his back, saying, You just stay put while I scatter some pansies, okay? The little gold head bobbed agreeably, totally fixated on his orange juice. Kakashi stepped easily over his head, pulling out another kunai almost lazily and smirking as the two boys took an apprehensive step backwards. He allowed the smirk to spread throughout his entire body, showing it to the kids, and waited a moment to give Naruto a chance to wake up, in case he wanted to watch. Then he moved. 10 seconds, 4 strikes and a mud bath later, all three would-be genin were running for their lives. Returning to his son, Kakashi observed Naruto's laughter and mused that the kid would go far in this business. Hey, kid, he said, hunkering down next to the short blonde child. Hungry? I have sandwiches. As Naruto somehow shoved an entire, whole sandwich into his mouth at once, Kakashi absently listened for the genin while trying to stop his son from giving himself indigestion. Moron's there, Brat is, under that bush, and Weiner is, up that tree. Mental note, his stealth is better than the others. They all seemed to be opting for observation for the time being, and Kakashi decided that they weren't an immediate threat. So, moving on, Naruto, today I'm going to teach you about something called tactics, he said. What better place to teach the kid this than here? with a great many examples of what not to do all around him. Naruto looked up, blue eyes squinting because of how much food was in his mouth, making his cheeks bulge. "Wern," he managed, giving Kakashi a truly nauseating view of an entire half-chewed sandwich. "Naruto, swallow, then talk," he sighed. "Don't talk when there is food in your mouth, remember? Because it's rude, it's gross and daddy can't understand you anyway." Naruto nodded and swallowed with difficulty, then tried again. "Tactics?" he asked. Kakashi nodded. "Tactics," he repeated, but didn't stress it further. "A tactic is, well, similar to a plan. It's how you approach something." Naruto cocked his head, confused, and Kakashi reached into his backpack, pulling out Naruto's wooden blocks. He spread them out on the grass before Naruto. "Okay," he said, rapidly stacking 4 of them, one on top of the other to create a small tower. "Say it was your mission to knock this tower over. What would you do?" Naruto cocked his head adorably. "Hi, he suggested. Kakashi nodded. "Yes, hitting it is a good idea. But where would you hit it? Remembering you want to make all the blocks fall over." "Where would make all the blocks fall?" He watched as Naruto considered, turning back to the tower to examine it. Eventually, he came up with his answer and said firmly, "Boem-un." "The bottom one? So, your plan," Kakashi stressed, "is to hit the bottom block, and so make all of them fall over?" Naruto nodded, and he ruffled his hair. "Good work. Yes, that's a good plan. That is an example of a tactic, see?" For a second the Junin thought Moron was going to make a move, but the next instant the hint of movement died, and he refocused on Naruto. "What if you wanted to knock the tower over, but you couldn't hit the bottom one? There's something blocking the bottom one so you can't touch it?" Naruto looked over the tower again, taking a little longer this time. Kakashi hoped the exercise wasn't confusing him. But eventually the little head nodded firmly as the child sat back on his bottom again. He said, pointing at the block second from the bottom. Kakashi nodded, half kneeling next to him. Very good. Now, what if? He stopped as a twig snapped loudly and someone swore about, 10 feet behind him and rolled his eyes. Moron was on the move. And would have continued if not for the way Naruto's eyes snapped to Moron, absolutely livid, and snatched up one of the unused blocks in his right hand. "Shut up, tryna lean," he screamed, throwing the block as hard as his little limb could hurl it. Kakashi blinked when he heard a thunk crack and a howl of pain as it hit, followed by a thump as Moron tumbled to the ground. He held himself perfectly still, staring at the now smug expression on Naruto's baby face. "I'm not going to turn around," he said slowly and loudly enough for Moron to hear him, "because if I do, I'm going to see a wannabe genin who has been downed by a 3-year-old. That kid has one hell of an arm on him." Moron grumbled, clothing rustling noisily as he sat up. "OWW." Kakashi was mildly surprised. "Oh, you're still awake then? Not one of your best throws, Naruto." Naruto scowled, first at the genin, then at his father and finally at the blocks on the grass in front of him. "Hi, IMWIV da side, stead of da corner. You have to learn to compensate for that, remember?" his father reminded him. Naruto's surly look didn't vanish. "Stupid bok." Kakashi smiled, not that it could be seen through his mask, and continued, "So, Naruto, I have a challenge for you. Say there's a wall around the tower. How do you get to the bottom block to knock it all over?" He stood up, dusting off his knees. "And on that note, there's a genin or two who have little enough stealth for me to stop ignoring them." Instantly he turned in time to fend off an attack from both Moron and Whiner, each coming from different sides. Without preamble, he cracked their heads together and they dropped like stones. "You're going to have to try something different if you want to stand even a snowball's chance in hell of getting these bells," he informed their unconscious bodies. "Daddy, I has idea," Naruto said suddenly, and he turned back to the boy. "F ya climbed da wa, why cow no, over da boem bok. Or, you cow just no, over da wa too, f it's only, s big, s da tower." Kakashi laughed, and nodded. "Yes, that's right," he agreed. "Well done, you're getting the hang of this. Hang on, I have a couple of idiots to drop in the river." Saying so, he bent and lifted the weakly struggling boys he'd bashed together and ambled happily over to the nearby river, where he proceeded to toss them into the icy water. "I do hope you can swim. Next time, try something new. How's this?" Brad asked darkly from Naruto's direction. Kakashi spun around in time to see her fly at his son, kunai out, ready to slash at the toddler, and a second later he was there, grabbing and twisting her wrists, throwing her away, slamming her against a tree trunk and leaning close to speak in her ear. "Didn't I already warn you?" he said darkly. "What happens to people who attack my son?" Sitting among his blocks, Naruto grinned. This was going to be interesting. That evening, Kakashi was humming to himself as he cut carrots to cook for dinner. A thump made him pause, and he leaned back a little so he could peer into the living room, where he'd placed Naruto in a playpen while he made dinner. The playpen was empty, its wooden gate open, a wooden mock kunai abandoned next to the wooden bars. Kakashi sighed. He didn't know why he even bothered. Putting down his knife, he wiped his hands on his pants as he made his way through the house, searching out the young boy. Great ninja skills be damned. Kakashi stumbled a little as he stepped on something that gave under his weight. Looking down, he saw Oink, Naruto's favorite toy. He bent down and picked it up, frowning a little, and placed it carefully out of harm's way on the couch before continuing through the house. When he reached the hallway, a yellow flicker above him caught his attention. Aha! Naruto was on the second floor landing. Kakashi paused in the corner and watched Naruto trot down the upper-level hallway towards the stairs. He felt a pang in his heart when he realized Naruto was holding the frog Jiraiya had given him tucked under his arm, where Oink had resided for the last 2.5 years. He shoved angrily at the emotion. Of course Naruto would choose toads over dogs. It was in his blood. He was not and never would be Kakashi's son, and Kakashi needed to remember that. He couldn't allow himself to forget that fact. Jiraiya had more right to him as the kid's godfather than Kakashi would ever have. So why did his chest hurt? It was startlingly painful to watch Naruto stop at the top of the stairs and lift that orange frog plushie high above his head while Oink had been abandoned carelessly on the floor. But then a feral grin split the boy's face and he threw the toy as hard as he could, throwing so that it flew all the way down the stairs and hit the 1/3 from the bottom with a pitiful squeak. Naruto laughed, and Kakashi watched, stunned, as he, carefully, holding onto the rail and moving slowly just like Kakashi had taught him, descended the staircase and grabbed the frog harshly, dragging it back up to the top stair to repeat the whole process. This time he managed to hit the bottom stair, and he laughed delightedly. Kakashi decided to step in and moved into the child's field of view, bending to pick up the toy as Naruto struggled to climb down the stairs as fast as, slow and careful, would allow. "I see you're enjoying Gigi's gift," he commented, offering the toy back to the child. Naruto took it and nodded, grinning. "Yeah, make fun, squishy sound," he declared. Kakashi smiled a little. "So this is how you play with toys, huh? Interesting. I never noticed you doing this with Oink." Kakashi was taken aback at the disgust that was instantly written over the boy's face. "Not fro Oink. He my FWIEND, he half-shouted indignantly. "No, Ike stupid froggy." Kakashi had to bite back a shout of amusement as he thought of how Jiraiya would respond to that statement. He shook his head at the pouting child. "So, what did you name it?" he asked, gesturing the toy. Naruto shot him a look that said, "Are you stupid or something?" "S.A. Froggy, Daddy," he told him in a no-duck kind of way. "Froggies don't has names. Are dumb." Kakashi laughed. A pair walked towards the training grounds holding hands, one tall and silver-haired, the other short and blonde. Kakashi listened attentively as the boy told him in great detail about the outing he'd had with his godfather the day before. Kakashi had finally consented to give him 2 hours with the brat, as Jiraiya was leaving the village today and wouldn't be back for goodness knew how long. Even 2 hours seemed to be enough to expose the 4-year-old to some questionable, purely Jiraiya pastimes, and it was just as well Naruto was so innocent. And then, he did the weird dance thing he does and he stood on his hair and felled over. "Aro Gigi's an idiot," Naruto said matter-of-factly. Kakashi started and began to cough at the address. "Aro? Where did you learn that word?" he demanded, thinking it was a good thing Jiraiya was well and truly out of the country by now. Naruto blinked at him. The ladies at the hot springs was yellin' it at him. Kakashi closed his eye. He was going to regret asking this, but they called him Aro Gigi? No, they called him Aro something else, but I can remember the something else, so now he's Aro Gigi. Naruto nodded firmly. Kakashi said, tugging Naruto out of the way of a jogging genin team. Soon, they'd reached the sunny, grassy training field Kakashi favored when teaching his young companion things. He'd promised Naruto something special today, to reward him for his first day of learning kanji, the more difficult form of writing used in Konoha. It sort of surprised Kakashi how much the young boy seemed to enjoy physical learning, throwing kunai and taijutsu forms and the like. But as he always took pains to make it into a game of sorts, he supposed it wasn't too unusual. Neither of them knew how to play normally, after all. Okay, he said bright, stopping in the center of the training grounds. Today, we're going to do something special. Naruto nodded eagerly. Yeah. You promised. Something cool and awesome, right? Right. Whoa, hold on, Kakashi laughed, grabbing the flailing small fists. Today, I'm going to set you throwing kunai at those targets over there. Instantly, Naruto's face fell. But that's boring, he whined. I know how to do that. You promised something new. Kakashi grinned at the small boy. I did, huh? Well, here I was thinking today I'd teach you how to throw live kunai, but if you'd prefer something different. Naruto's eyes were wide. What's live kunai? He asked. Kakashi reached into his kunai pouch and drew out one of his kunai, the sort he used in real fights, and knelt to put himself on Naruto's level. This is a live kunai, he said, showing it to the child. A little more dangerous than the wooden mock-ups you've been taught with, nay? The odd look on the 4-year-old's face was hysterical as he tentatively reached out a tiny hand to, very carefully, touch the flat metal blade. When his hand came into contact with the cool metal, he jumped and jerked the hand backwards, and his eyes snapping up to Kakashi's. The adult smiled reassuringly, knowing Naruto knew him well enough to read the expression through his mask. Now, you have to listen to me, Naru, he said firmly. The rule that you're not allowed to touch daddy's kunai is still in place. If I am going to teach you to use live kunai, you have to promise me that you will only ever touch them here, in this training ground, with me here to watch you, until I specifically tell you otherwise. If I find out, and I will, I promise you, that you've been touching these without permission, I will stop teaching you this instantly, and you will have to go back to wooden kunai and shuriken until you are taught this in the academy. Do you understand? Naruto nodded instantly, and Kakashi ruffled his hair with his free hand, satisfied. Okay, then, he said, stowing his kunai back in his pouch and pulling out another kunai pouch from one of his many pockets. This is a weapons pouch I assembled for you. Using it, I will teach you how to use and care for the basic shinobi tools. Inside, you have 5 kunai, 5 shuriken and a roll of ninja wire. He opened the rather dirty pouch to show him, and Naruto's eyes widened even further at the thought that these were his now. Kakashi reached out to grab his wrist before the boy could plunge his hand into the pouch and explore it. Not just yet. Now, these are some of my old things, and they are blunted, but you still have to treat them as if they are battle-worthy, okay? I want to teach you good habits first, before giving you the deadly stuff. Also, you can still hurt yourself badly with kunai that are blunted, so promise me you will be careful, and not touch these without permission. I promise, Daddy, Naruto said earnestly. Kakashi nodded and stood up, brushing grass off his knees absently. Okay, then let's get this show on the road. First of all, how's about I show you what you can do with these weapons, if you learn to use them correctly? Without waiting for an answer, he placed Naruto's pouch on the ground and casually slipped his hand into his own pouch, drawing out several shuriken and a kunai. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the black star shuriken flying in a deadly arch, then caught the kunai firmly in his palm and spun, releasing it with practiced timing, allowing it to fly through the air, catching all 3 shuriken and pinning them to the dead center of a painted target on one of the posts nearby. After a pause that lasted only a second, the paper bomb wrapped around the handle of the kunai activated and the whole thing blew up. Kakashi smirked. There. Flashy, but simple, and something Naruto should be able to master within a year, if he worked hard enough. Well, minus the paper bomb, Kakashi had just thrown that in for effect. There was no way he was letting a 4-year-old with a prankster gene anywhere near explosives. Good enough to impress and motivate the 4-year-old. Cool. Wow. Kaboom. You are so amazing, Daddy. Naruto turned big blue eyes on his father, an expression of unadulterated hero worship on his features. Kakashi ruffled his hair again. So, shall we start? he suggested, bending to catch up the starter pouch he'd compiled for the boy. He knelt behind the 3-foot-high bundle of sunshine and put his arms around him, fitting a blunt kunai to his small hand and beginning the long process of teaching him how to use it. Kakashi strode through the streets of Konoha, his left hand holding firmly to Naruto's right, tugging him along whenever he got distracted, slowing him down when he tried to race on ahead. It had been 3 months since he'd first begun teaching Naruto how to use live kunai, and he was reasonably pleased with the boy's progress. He still wouldn't dare let him practice unsupervised, but he'd gotten much better with the metal weapons. He'd even become rather adept at cleaning them and rebinding the handles. Kakashi was currently mulling over the pros and cons of teaching him how to sharpen the weapons too. So far, cons were winning. Kakashi, said Hitaki, glanced up and nodded as Inuzuka Sume waved at him, calling him over to her. She was seated on the grass, leaning back against her big dog Koromaru, and she grinned up at him as he approached. "Hey, kid," she said. "What's up?" "Not much. We've come to play in the park," Kakashi said dryly, nodding at Naruto, who had pulled his hand free of his father and was cautiously approaching Koromaru. The large animal was watching him with an amused eye. Sume nodded. "Yeah, my youngest one is playing here, too," she said, nodding at the playground 15 meters in front of them. "And I'm not on duty until tomorrow, so I got time to watch the little monster." Kakashi nodded absently, watching Naruto tentatively place his hand on Koromaru's side, and then very cautiously begin stroking his fur. Koromaru was clearly trying not to laugh. "Naruto," the silver-haired Junin said, catching the blonde's attention, "you have half an hour here before we need to leave. Why don't you go play? I'll be right here if you need me." The 4-year-old nodded enthusiastically, gave the fascinating, huge dog one last pat and raced off to the playground, leaving Kakashi to sink onto the ground, pull out a romance novel he'd found in his father's study and begin to read. Naruto loved the park. He loved it. It was so much fun, with seesaws and sandpits and rickety bridges and a big slide that went really fast, but by far, Naruto's favorite was the swing. He'd been trying to convince Daddy that they really needed a swing in their own backyard, but so far, Daddy had been unconvinced. All in all, it was little wonder the blonde made a beeline towards the swing set. "Naruto." The youngest Hitaki stopped and turned around, and broke into a grin when he saw a brown-haired, brown-eyed boy with red triangles on his cheeks and a green smear on his grubby t-shirt. His name was Kiba. He was cool. Naruto grinned and broke into a run, racing to join the boy who'd called him. "Hey, Kiba," he cheered. The taller boy grinned down at him. "Haven't seen you in a while," he commented. Naruto shook his head and grinned sheepishly. "Daddy said I couldn't come for a whole week, 'cause I kinda, set the living room on fire." The blonde trailed off, looking shamefaced, but Kiba just laughed. "And you only got a week without the park? Man, if I'd done that, my mum tanned my hide so bad. I had early bedtime, too, and a extra hour of maths every day," Naruto moaned. "My brain hurts f-arm all the sums." Kiba grinned at him again, showing off unnaturally, but, in Naruto's opinion, totally cool, sharp canine teeth. "You wanna play with me?" he asked generously. Naruto was a little kid, after all, and it was Kiba's task as a grown-up 6-year-old to be nice. Naruto looked up at the taller boy hopefully. "Will you push me on the swings?" he asked, blue eyes pleading with the Inuzuka. Kiba rolled his brown eyes, but was distracted almost instantly when he noticed another boy standing off to the side, silently watching the playing, squealing children in the park. "Shino," he said, "hey, come on." He added to Naruto, and quickly trotted over to the boy he'd noticed, Naruto at his heels. "Hey, Shino," he said brightly. The new boy looked at Kiba for a moment, and then nodded his head. "Hello," he said quietly, his eyes turning back to look out over the park. Kiba grinned at him, and then at a confused and shy Naruto. "This is Shino," he announced. "His dad and my mum are friends. He's my age." "Shino, this is Naruto. He's just little, but he's okay." "I'm not little." Naruto instantly protested at a yell. "I'm big too." Kiba scoffed. "I'm 6. You're 4. You're little." Naruto scowled. "Almost 5, he grumbled. The new boy, Shino, quickly broke up the building argument by simply stepping between them and saying, "Hello, Naruto," in a soft, calming tone. Instantly, the argument was forgotten in the way only children can manage. "We're gonna play ninja," Kiba announced. "Wanna play, Shino?" Naruto didn't remember agreeing to this, but decided to go along with it anyway. Playing ninja was fun. Not as fun as when he played learning to be a ninja with daddy, but still good. After a pause, Shino nodded once. That would be acceptable. Within 10 minutes they were running through the park, desperate to get away from a group of evil enemy missing nin armed with exploding kunai and fireballs and bumblebees. Naruto shouted. The others paused. "Why bumblebees?" Kiba asked. Naruto crossed his arms and puffed out his cheeks sulkily. "Bumblebees is scary," he said stubbornly. Kiba considered. It was a fair point. "Bumblebees!" he screamed at the top of his lungs, "Run!" Giggling, the three of them ducked under the rickety bridge to hide as a swarm of bumblebees flew overhead. "We had to do something quick," Kiba hissed, excitement lighting up his eyes. "Or they'll break through the walls and Konoha'll be doomed." "I can take care of the bees," offered Shino. Kiba nodded. "You wait here, Naruto," he instructed. "'S too dangerous for someone as little as you." "But I'm not little," Naruto protested, dismayed and reluctant to be left behind. "I want to help." Kiba considered. "No, idiot. You get to be backup," he declared. "But that means you gotta wait here until I calls for you. 'Cause you're the hero who comes in last second and surprises the bad guys." "Yeah." Satisfied, Naruto nodded and huddled under the bridge as the two older warriors bravely left safety to fight off bees and enemy shinobi. Within 2 minutes tense waiting, Naruto heard Kiba shout for him, and ran out to help. On the way, though, he stumbled and tripped over, sprawling over the grassy ground and bumping into someone sitting on the edge of the sandpit. There was a stunned pause, before the boy he'd bumped turned around, dropping the handful of sand he'd been sifting and glaring. "Watch it," he snapped. Naruto pulled himself to his knees and shook his head, his lip trembling when he saw he'd grazed his wrist. "Naruto, are you okay?" Kiba skidded to a stop next to the fallen child and tried to pull him to his feet. "You need to be careful," he scolded. "You could get hurt, and then Mum'll be mad at me fair not looking after you right." Shino jogged up and was watching silently. What he needs is to look where he's going, the dark-haired boy Naruto had bumped into put in. "He crashed right into me, and he hasn't even said sorry." Kiba looked annoyed. "Leave him alone, Uchiha. He's just a little kid. He's 4. Glancing at Naruto, he added, "This is Uchiha Sasuke. He's in my class at the academy, and he's a total teacher's pet. Gets every answer right." Naruto looked up at the new boy curiously. "Hi," he said shyly. Sorry, I tripped, didn't mean to hit you." Sasuke looked mollified at the explanation, and the fact that it was a kid much younger than him, 2 whole years, who'd bumped him, and nodded back. Maybe you shouldn't run as fast," he offered, sounding much more, not friendly exactly, but definitely no longer hostile. "My Aniki says that it's best to move a little slower and be safe than to rush and be injured. My daddy says, F it won't kill ya, go nuts," Naruto quoted clumsily. Sasuke frowned at him, the idea that anyone could think something different to his wonderful Aniki rather hard to grasp. Naruto looked up. "Daddy." Kakashi had seen the tumble and had come to investigate. "Are you alright?" "My arm's bleedin'," Naruto reported, holding out the limb. Kakashi took it and examined the slight graze. "Ouch," he commented, mentally stating that the kid was fine. "Here, I'll wash it off for you. Say goodbye to your friends, Naru, we need to go now." Naruto nodded. "Bye," he called to the 3 older boys gathered around him. "See ya," Kiba said back. "Bye," Sasuke added. Shino inclined his head, but he was weird, so it didn't bother the blonde as he was lifted and carried to the water fountain nearby, where Daddy quickly rinsed off his graze and dried it with a handkerchief, fixing a band-aid in place once he was done. Kakashi finished quickly and ruffled Naruto's hair, saying, "Daddy needs to do some shopping now, okay? Come on, let's do that quickly, and then we'll go home. And maybe I'll even let us stop off to get some ramen for dinner on the way home." The promise in place, he led Naruto towards the marketplace, smiling at the child's cheer. Weaving through the crowded streets, one hand firmly clasped around Naruto's, Kakashi mused that it was times like this he was truly grateful Sarutobi had chosen him to raise the brat. Naruto was like sunshine incarnate, lighting up his otherwise grim world. He'd never thought having a child would end up being so fun. Realizing exactly what he was thinking, Kakashi gave himself a mental slap, and then a mental kick in the shins for good measure. What am I thinking? He asked himself angrily, this is just temporary. Naruto's not really my son. Don't lose sight of reality, Hokage. Focus. Real parents don't get paid for parenting. He let go of Naruto's hand as if he'd been burned, and instead muttered a, keep up, to the kid, navigating his way through the marketplace and pausing at a vegetable stall. Quickly, he made some selections, glancing occasionally at the boy standing patiently, or not so patiently, beside him to make sure he hadn't wandered off. Naruto curled his little fingers into Daddy's pant leg, anchoring himself to the man in an instinctive bid not to lose him, his eyes flitting around the marketplace curiously. It was really interesting, this whole place. There was something going on in every direction, and Naruto amused himself trying to observe everything at once, finally settling on watching a pigeon trying to work up the courage to pick up half a crust of bread from near a busy bread stall. Daddy started to move, a paper bag tucked under his arm, and Naruto allowed himself to be tugged along by his grip on his father's clothing. They stopped again, and Naruto glanced up to see they were at a stall that sold pasta and rice and stuff like that. Bored with the idea, he looked around again and his eyes lit up when he spotted it. An orange balloon, ownerless, dancing along teasingly through the crowds, ignored by everyone as the wind blew it to and fro along the ground. Naruto was hooked. Without a thought, he let go of his father and left his side, weaving through the crowds and never once taking his eyes off the bright orange bubble. He'd almost reached it when firm hands clapped around his ribcage and hoisted him up into the air. Daddy must have caught him. Squirming, Naruto turned to pout at his father, but the expression slid right off as instead of his father's reproving features, he was confronted with the face of a total stranger. With a shriek of surprise and fear, Naruto began struggling in earnest, the hundreds of warnings his father had given him about going with strangers echoing in his mind. The stranger shifted so that he could bring his hands together to make hand seals, quickly flashing through a few and saying a couple of words Naruto didn't understand. Suddenly, the 4-year-old felt exhausted, and his eyes began to fall closed. Just before he drifted off, he sensed the man carrying him stroking his hair, saying, "There now, shush. That was a good deal easier than I expected it to be, little Hokage. You just be a good boy and sleep now." Then, Naruto was forced to give in to the strange drowsiness, and fell asleep. Dai was getting fed up with this stupid mission. He gritted his teeth as he plunged into an icy cold stream, washing himself as quickly as physically possible before shooting out again, drying himself and dressing rapidly. Rubbing a towel through his wet hair, he wandered back towards camp, thinking longingly of hot baths and proper beds and mountains instead of these endless trees and home in general. Stupid Konoha? As he neared camp, he heard Maro and Jiro arguing again. He sighed heavily but didn't pause on his way back to them, tuning in on the conversation as he plonked down next to the burned-out fire. "I'm telling you, there is no way that will work," Maro snapped. "If you think that Hokage is stupid enough to leave his house unwarded, I can bypass any ward," Jiro interrupted, "and it's the only time the bastard takes his eyes off the brat, when he's asleep." "I still say we need to gather more information," Maro argued. "We've been trailing them for 2 weeks. Jiro retorted. "If we wait much longer, we'll be found out. Perhaps we could lure him out," Dai mused boredly. He rolled his eyes at the twin scoffs he received. "No way. Not going to work." And then they were back to arguing. Dai dropped his head on his hands and mused that this was in no way worth what he was being paid for it. Like a silent ghost, a new figure darted into their camp. "Pack it up, boys and girls," it said in a sing-song voice. "We're moving out." The other 3 men looked up in amazement as their team leader Kane stood before them, the objective of their mission held tight and sleeping in his arms. "You got him," exclaimed Jiro. "How?" frowned Dai. "You better not have raised the alarm," Kane threatened Maro. Kane shifted the child in his arms and waved the concern away. "Nah, but I'd advise we move out before his father realizes he's gone, hey? Come on, hustle." The others all winced at the thought and quickly set about demolishing any trace of the camp. Within 5 minutes, they were on the move, heading back to their village. Kakashi was halfway through buying milk and butter when he glanced down and didn't see Naruto standing obediently beside him. His heart leapt in his chest, and for a moment, Kakashi fell victim to absolute panic, spinning and scanning the area around him frantically for the sight of the small, yellow-haired child. He couldn't see him, and for a moment the panic threatened to overwhelm him, but then his ninja training took over and he forced the feeling back. Calm down. He can't have gone far, he reasoned with himself. Without a thought, he set his groceries down right there and striding away through the bustling market, eyes scanning the area rapidly. He stubbornly fought down the sick feeling in his gut, as well as the horrible what-ifs circling in his mind. When it became apparent he wasn't going to find the kid easily by himself, he bit into his thumb without hesitation and flashed through a series of hand signs before slamming his palm down on the ground firmly. With a flash of chakra and a small cloud of smoke, Pakun appeared. "Yo," the pug said. "What's up?" He paused, sniffing the air. "You smell worried, Kakashi. What's happened? Where's the little one?" "That's the problem, Pakun," Kakashi said, bristling at the accusation. "He's lost. And I do not smell worried. I'm a seasoned shinobi, I don't worry." "Whatever you say, boss," Pakun snorted. Then what the man had actually said clicked and his head jerked up, mild panic filling his eyes. "Wait, did you say missing? Then why are we just standing here? Let's find him." Kakashi nodded and Pakun scrambled to his paws, shoving his nose down into the dirt to search for the well-known smell of his master's puppy. Him, the pug hummed to himself as he led Kakashi through the marketplace, unconsciously tracing the shopping route Kakashi had taken. "Yes, okay. So he was still with you here, and then you turned this corner, he's still with you. And then you stopped at this stall here and, What?" Kakashi demanded, then winced at how anxious he sounded. "What do you smell?" He tried again, managing to sound much more controlled. Pakun glanced at him and continued tracking, even as he answered. "Your scent stays there, by the stall, but his wanders over this way, by itself." He must have seen something that caught his interest, or something. Kakashi nodded. That was likely. Naruto had just wandered away, and was probably even now searching blindly for his daddy, frightened and tired, but unharmed and in no danger. A small amount of relief spread throughout the Hokage, even as he felt guilty. He hadn't noticed the kid's absence for more than 15 minutes. Then, oh no, shit, Pakun snarled, hackles rising. Kakashi twitched. "What?" he snapped, not caring this time how anxious he sounded. Pakun looked up at him with serious chocolate eyes. "Kakashi, he was taken," he said seriously. Kakashi felt his heart freeze. "What do you mean?" he asked in a low voice. The dog closed his eyes. "I mean, someone took him, Kakashi. Someone picked him up and carried him away. Foreign scent." There was a pause as that sunk in. Pakun looked up to see the visible skin on Kakashi's face was paper white. "No," he whispered, and took off top speed. Naruto blinked groggily, shifting slowly. His head hurt, his throat was dry, and above all he missed Daddy. It took him a moment to figure out why he was feeling so miserable and frightened, before he remembered what had happened before he had fallen asleep. Instantly, he gave a distressed cry and began to move, writhing in his spot in an attempt to sit up. It took him a long moment to realize that someone had draped a rough blanket over him, and he began to cry plaintively. Instantly, a shape moved towards him and touched him gently, and Naruto flinched violently. He cracked his eyes open to see a red-haired man with scars crisscrossing his left cheek. "What's wrong with it?" the red-haired man was asking, but he wasn't looking at Naruto. No, he was looking over the small body of the others gathered there. Naruto spun his head, taking in all of them, black hair, brown hair, green hair, and began to cry harder. "Might be scared," offered black hair. "I sure as hell would be. It's probably thirsty. The sleep jutsu does that," green hair said dismissively, unscrewing the cap of a bottle. He grabbed Naruto and forced him to sit up, kneeling behind him and weaving his hand through gold hair, tilting the child's head back and forcibly placing the bottle at his lips. "Drink, you brat," he added roughly. Naruto gagged and spluttered, managing to swallow some but not nearly all of the cool, metal-tasting liquid that flooded his mouth. The rest splashed down over his front, soaking his shirt through. His tears leaked faster and he struggled against the cruel grip on his hair, desperate to be free. "Hey, Maro, how's about you don't drown the kid?" brown hair said, tugging green hair away and smiling at Naruto gently. "Hey, your name is Naruto, right? I'm Kane. It's okay now, you just be good, and no one will hurt you. I want DD dad die, Naruto choked, curling into a defensive ball. The adults exchanged glances and leers. Do you now? Black hair droned. Fat chance, green hair snapped. Not after all the trouble we went to get you away from bloody Hokage. You're not going to be staying with your daddy anymore, red hair said quietly. Naruto froze. I'm not? He asked haltingly. Kane shook his head. No, he said gently. Look, this is Dai. He pointed at red hair, Maro, green hair, and Jiro. Black hair. We're ninja from Kumokagore. We're here to take you home. Don't you see? You were born in Lightning Country. You belong with us. Yeah, we totally have claim to a Hokage. Jiro said enthusiastically. No way are we giving that up. No matter what bastard wants his baby home with him, Maro added snidely. Shouldn't have screwed around with a lightning girl in the first place, should he? Little harsh, Maro, Dai commented dryly. Naruto stared around at them all, uncomprehending. But, I don't want to leave daddy, he said, his lips trembling as tears threatened to fall again. I love daddy. There was an awkward pause. He'll forget, Kane said confidently. Then, to Naruto, come on, kid. Enough of a break. We need to keep moving. Naruto watched the man reach out to grab him, and just like that, his fear and uncertainty vanished. In its place was a sort of quivery determination that filled his whole body. They wouldn't take him. He wouldn't let them, and then daddy would come and kick their butts. His blue eyes narrowed and he quickly scrambled to his feet, falling into a taijutsu stance his daddy had taught him. The next second, Kane grabbed for him, and the fight began. Kakashi slammed into the Hokage's office, totally bypassing both the secretary in the foyer and the Chunin guards stationed outside the office door, Pakun hot on his heels. Naruto. He's been abducted, he burst out, cutting right across what looked like a briefing for a mission. The Junin squad all looked rather affronted, and then shocked and sympathetic as they realized why exactly their fellow Junin had interrupted. Sarutobi paused for a moment to gather himself. Kakashi, calm down, he said firmly. What has happened? Naruto has been abducted, taken out of the village. Kakashi repeated agitatedly. Don't know who or why, but they were in the marketplace, and I looked away for a second, and Pakun says they grabbed him right there. Please, Hokage-sama, grant me leave to leave the village. I need to find him. Sarutobi blinked. Wait, he said. He turned to the Junin team gathered in his office. You can go, you have your orders, he said. The four Junin nodded and disappeared, leaving Kakashi and Pakun alone with the old man. Kakashi, take a moment to calm yourself. I will gather a Chunin squad to go with you. But, Kakashi began to protest the delay, but a look from Sarutobi silenced him. Please hurry, he murmured. The half an hour he was forced to wait while a team was assembled and briefed was easily the most tortuous, the most painful he had ever experienced, including that time when he was being interrogated in Iwa and they'd poured acid over his body. Finally, it was time to leave. Kakashi jerked to his feet and swept his eyes over the three Chunin assembled. Pretty good for a last-minute thing, but not the ninja he would have chosen if he could have. Kurenai, one of the kunoichi from his age group, all set for the Junin exam next month, and two people Kakashi knew only by sight and name, Kamizuki Izumo and Hagane Katetsu, 18, relatively new to being Chunin. Kakashi fidgeted as the Hokage gave them a few last-minute orders and was out the window before Sarutobi had even completed the word, go. It was a moment before the Chunin realized what had happened, and they exchanged confused looks, but the Sandame just sighed and waved them after him. Catch up if you can, he advised. Then they were off. Naruto sank his teeth into the arm that reached towards him, throwing a punch at the near body of the big man. When he tasted blood, he let go instantly, spitting and gagging, only just computing Kane's cry of pain as he did so. Ah, the feral little son of a bitch, he shouted, clapping his hand over the perfect ring of teeth marks he now had bleeding on his arm. That's gonna scar, you fucking son of a bastard, you mean, Maro corrected, eyes fixed on the panting 4-year-old who was standing slightly clumsily in his best fighting stance. Of course Hitaki would teach Ickle bastard a few fighting moves. Damn it. Well, wasn't Daddy Hitaki already, like, a genin by the age of this runt? Dai asked. We could have a fight on our hands. Bah, Jiro scoffed. He's still just a kid. Grab him. While they were talking, the four of them had circled around Naruto, forming a 4-point ring to hem in the wide-eyed child. Naruto spun his head, searching for an escape route, and just barely managed to dodge out of the way when Maro made a lunge at him. Just like WIV Daddy, the blonde thought to himself grimly, ducking under Kane's arms to deliver a punishing kick to the shins. Somehow, it wasn't even remotely fun, unlike when he played like this with Daddy. Daddy? Naruto choked on a sob as arms enveloped him, and he began to claw at them, squirming, biting, kicking, elbowing and punching to get loose. Somehow, he slipped through the arms and fell to the ground. I won, go WIV them. I can. Dai had a hold on him now, hoisting him into the air by his arms and crushing him against his chest. So all the little teeth could find to bite into was a tough Junin vest. Naruto squirmed desperately, reaching, stretching. I just has to hold on. He felt his hand brush the coarse material, and jerked, managing to slide that crucial inch and a half closer. Daddy will come. He's gonna come get me. He promised. Little fingers curled around a hard cylinder, and Naruto blinked to rid himself of tears before jerking his hand back, inadvertently driving his elbow into Dai's right tricep. Dai didn't even notice, being too preoccupied with a squirming body and flailing legs. Daddy, please hurry. I'm frightened. This last mental plea echoing in his mind, Naruto gritted his teeth and swung his arm, driving his clenched right fist with all his might against Dai's hip, the only place his short arms could reach in his current position. It worked. Dai swore loudly and Naruto was once again dropped to the ground, where he dragged himself to his feet and fell back into a wobbly, ready, stance, stolen kunai held out before him, red blood dripping off it slowly. Fucking brat, he stabbed me, whined Dai. Kane, that sleep jutsu of yours would be good around about now, Jiro prompted, taking a step forwards and jerking back as Naruto slashed at him. The men looked angry now. Naruto was trembling, more frightened than he'd ever been as he tried desperately to stand tall and be brave. Daddy? Pakun led the retrieval team through the trees at breakneck speed, the scent of the kidnappers fresh enough for him to follow it easily. Kakashi was right on his tail, almost literally, to the point where he was glad he didn't have a long bushy tail like Ryu or Shiba. If he had, it would have already been trodden on by his frantic master. Kakashi was himself more frightened than he could ever remember being. The day Obito died, the Kyuubi attack, every single assassination, it all paled in comparison to this feeling. What would he do if Naruto was gone? Dead, or lost to him forever? No. Kakashi shoved that thought away. He wouldn't let that happen. No matter what it took, he would get Naruto back. He wouldn't let anyone steal his son from him like this. The Junin missed a beat as he realized his thoughts, and a second later his mind settled into a sort of grim understanding. Yes, Naruto was his son. Nothing would ever change that. He'd raised, cared for, fed, nursed, loved, yes, he truly loved him. More than anything. And now, paternal instinct was rearing in him, ugly and animalistic. He would tear apart the ones who dared to take his son from him. That was a promise. He just regretted that it took something like this for him to realize it. Cursing himself for not seeing, not understanding, for never telling the boy, his son, just how much he meant to his daddy, Kakashi gritted his teeth and put on another burst of speed, making Pakun yelp and begin to pump harder, trying to keep pace. Keep up, the Hitaki snarled back at the winded Chunin following him, not caring one jot that they were growing tired. Not far now, Pakun panted at him, glancing at him long enough for Kakashi to spot the fire in his usually gentle eyes. The pug was as angry as he, well, almost as angry as he was. It was impossible to be as angry as a scared father. But Pakun loved Naruto, too. His pack leader's puppy. Just up ahead, the small animal barked. They're on the ground, not moving. We should be there, right, now. Kakashi forced himself to stop in a tree 100 meters back when Pakun did and observed the situation. Below them, 4 tall figures circled a fifth, smaller one. Kakashi's eyes, used to spotting such details, quickly spotted and logged their Kumo Hite 8 and their defensive stances, before flicking to Naruto and seeing the bloody kunai in his hand. From this angle, he couldn't see the child's face, but he could see that he was shivering. Several of the men were bleeding, and Kakashi felt a stab of pride despite everything. That's my boy. The man with brown hair was flicking through hand signs, and suddenly there was a flare of chakra and Naruto gave a distressed cry before crumpling. The man with green hair caught him and lifted him roughly, slinging the limp body over his shoulder carelessly. Kakashi leant forwards and snarled, sounding more like a dog than Pakun did, and launched himself right into the midst of the kidnappers. Hite ate up, Sharingan glowing in angry red, a deadly, demonic fury written across Kakashi's whole stance. There was just enough time for one of the fucking deadmen who dared to touch his son to say in a slow "Okay, what do we do now" tone, "Shit." Before, for the first time since Obito had died, Kakashi lost himself to anger. Kotetsu was running, trying to catch up with his crazy squad leader, when suddenly the beautiful woman, Kurenai, wasn't it? That was on their squad caught him around the shoulders and sent them both crashing to a stop on a tree branch. Izumo banged into them from behind. "What?" Kotetsu began, but Kurenai just pointed ahead and below them. One glance, and both teenagers were suddenly highly relieved she had stopped them. The carnage was unbelievable. Within 10 minutes, the horrible sounds below them stopped, and Kotetsu felt it was safe to uncover his eyes and look again. Kakashi Senpai was kneeling in the middle of the bodies of the men he'd fought, slaughtered, cradling the limp body of the kid they'd been sent to recover tied to his chest, his face buried in the boy's blonde hair. Kurenai was the first one who dared to move. She knew Kakashi, so she felt a measure of reassurance in the thought that he probably would recognize her before he attacked her. She had seen ninja in this state before, and knew that it would take very little to set him off again. Cautiously, she jumped down from her tree branch, landing lightly before him. Kotetsu and Izumo watched her as if she were crazy. "Kakashi?" she called, not moving any closer. For a long moment, he didn't respond, but just as Kurenai was preparing to back off and give him some time to try and drag his mind back together, his head lifted and he looked directly at her. To her very great relief, he didn't seem angry any longer, rather, frightened and grieving. Then, the moment passed and, like a switch had been flipped, Kakashi the father was put away and Kakashi the shinobi was back. "Kurenai," he said, his voice perfectly level as he raised a hand to pull his Hite down over his Sharingan eye. He didn't let go of Naruto for a second. Naruto, is he?" Kurenai was afraid to ask. Kakashi shook his head, settling back to sit on the blood-splattered ground, heedless of the corpses around him. "He's alive, but I can't get him to wake up," he said, a touch of despair worming its way into his voice. "I think I recognized those hand seals," Kurenai offered. "I'm fairly sure it was a genjutsu. Do you want me to have a look at him?" Instantly, Kakashi's arms tightened around the unconscious boy protectively, but after a moment good sense won out and he sighed, nodding once and laying the boy down in his lap, flicking a finger to call Kurenai over. Understandably, Kurenai hesitated, not very anxious to approach the man she'd just seen tear 4 genin bigger than himself limb from limb, almost literally. Suddenly, she understood why exactly Kakashi had graduated and been promoted so early. He was brilliant and terrifying. Reminding herself firmly that it was still Kakashi, and that he hadn't changed. Just her perception of him, Kurenai moved closer, kneeling before the man. She could sense that he was as tense as a coiled spring as she carefully reached out a hand to examine Naruto, and made sure all her movements were slow and non-threatening. After a moment, she was sure. "It's just a mild sleep jutsu," she reported. "He's fine, not in any pain. I can remove it, but it's safest just to let it wear off naturally. It should only take a couple of hours or so, and he'll wake up feeling like he's just had a nap. Is that okay?" After a pause, Kakashi nodded. Hooking his arms around Naruto and hugging him close again, he stood, saying, "Let's get him home, then. The two boys can gather what's left of them." He jerked his head at the bodies, and up in the tree, Izumo and Kotetsu both winced. Naruto came back to the world groggily, unwillingly. Eventually, he was awake enough to recognize the warmth around him, the iron arms hooked under his shoulders and knees, holding him close to a strong chest, the sensation of movement as the person carrying him leapt between trees. The last thing he remembered was Kane doing that some jutsu thing on him, and him feeling really sleepy, and Naruto let out a choked sob as he realized he must be being carried by one of those horrible men that were taking him away. He began to struggle weakly, tears stinging eyes he had yet to open. The arms hugged him tighter for a moment, and a jolt ran through Naruto as the man spoke. "There now. Don't worry, Naru, I got you." He knew that voice. That was. Naruto's eyes flew open and he looked up at his daddy's masked face, his mouth opening slightly in surprise as relief flooded through him so sharp it hurt. "Daddy," he croaked. Kakashi glanced down at him and responded by holding him even tighter. "I'm here, son. You found me," Naruto mumbled tearfully. "You came. I knew you'd come. Daddy." Kakashi shifted Naruto so that he was held up against his chest, and Naruto put his hands around Daddy's neck and breathed in the comforting smell that was his father, beginning to sob openly. Kakashi just rubbed his back, murmuring in his ear softly even as he continued the journey back to Konoha without breaking stride. "Shush, it's okay, don't worry. I would never let them take you away. I'm sorry I didn't get there sooner, Naruto. I love you. Everything is going to be okay. You're safe now. I love you. I love you, my son." That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.